Ready? Tell me when you're ready to start recording, Chris, and then I will start.
There you go.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Health and Buildings Roundtable 2022. Today is September 29th, the second day of our two-day forum event, and we're delighted, absolutely delighted to have everybody here. The title of today's events is called Fixing the Gaps, Now and Into the Future, Solutions and Opportunities. And yesterday we had an entire track on minding the gaps, and we had three amazing panels, many speakers, a lot of content, and a lot of food for thought. I do have a prepared piece of here to do for my opening remarks, but our morning would not be complete without me first and foremost recognizing Charles Bloomberg, who is here. He is the founding visionary for HiBR. And Charles, I don't know if you are prepared to say anything, but we would love to hear your voice in your voice. So, so welcome. A minute to you.
Minute, okay. I have no prepared information. As usual, as with my career, most of it was off the top of my head. And I'm very pleased that Susan or whoever else, Kumkum, got this underway. It's always nice to revisit the past, and especially since the work that we were doing just, it developed. It was not a solid plan in place from the get-go. It was a lot of investigation, obviously, and the campus in general very much needed back in the day when I started with it, which was, my best guess is July the 6th, I think is when I came on, of I keep thinking 1776, but not that old, but it was 1976. And I spent several weeks just doing a walkthrough of the campus to see the status of the buildings before I really got serious about what we could do about them. So we knew one thing. We wanted to be as systematic as we possibly could be because of the nature of the work and the complex spread of the building and building types. We wanted to see if there was, how many things were as comparable in each building, so that if we came up with an early plan just to get people involved, that we could give them some lead lines and give them opportunities to get on board if they felt they wanted to. And fortunately, it worked out that way. A lot of people from across the campus very much were interested in it. Well, if you think of it in the way of many of the folks in the various buildings thought of, especially the clinical center, thought that the rats that were used in research had better environments than the humans. And when I heard that, you can just imagine how my head went spinning, but it was a good way for them to tell me where they thought they were, and to also tell me what work we needed to do to change that attitude and to change that scene. And it wasn't going to happen overnight. Later on, after we'd actually gotten a little bit of a start and got a lot of good folks involved, either by invitation or because they saw what was going on and realized that there was a strong across the board, across the country, across the globe need for understanding better how to the problems of if I run out of time yet, because I could go this for a while, but I'm sure you're all on the same page. We had to we really had to move along too quickly and get the right people. So further downstream, and I'll close off with this until I see how things go with you guys. We began inviting members in the private sector, and that really gave us a shot in the arm, because we had gaps in the personnel that we already had on board that were members of the NIH campus and the federal government locally at the same time. So in order to do really good research, we felt we needed to have a very good balance between private and public. Frankly, that was a good move, and but it required a lot of extra work and insights and figuring out how we could change some of the attitudes and working together.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles, for bringing your wisdom, bringing your vision. And, you know, you're a tough act to follow, and we're going to do our best. Public, private, and everything in academia, research, healthcare, you name it.
Right.
You're the one who's kind of pulled a lot of us together here and kept us here. And our theme yesterday was continuity, because we said when we know about sustainability, resilience, and all of that. So we say, what do we do to continue the mission that you started way back when? So thank you again. Thank you for being here. I hope you can stay. Today's session continues till 3 p.m. I'm going to remind everybody else to please keep yourselves muted. The meeting is being recorded. And Charles, just so you know, we do have other members of the team that's come alongside with me. We've got Chris Pearson and Lan Vanderheij from our company. We've got Meenakshi Mittal, who worked on the website and a lot of the preparatory material. And then we have the core team of folks here. We've got Susan and Linda Sorrento and Barbara Hewlett and Judy Herwagen. We've a lot of folks. This has been a together thing.
That's so good. Yeah. Thank you so much for all.
So that's kind of where we are. Chat box. I need to let everybody know, it's just part of the housekeeping aspect here, that the chat box is available for anyone who's experiencing a technical issue. And we'll do the best to facilitate support based on the comments. If you could please put your questions for moderators and panelists and just name to whom your question is directed. And that way we hope we can be able to have some time today to address those. We're going to try to do our best to stay on, keep really tight on time. And somebody, maybe Chris or hopefully the moderator, will give a call time check at, say, about the 5-minute mark, the 3 and the 1-minute mark. So I did have another thing prepared, but I'm just going to let everybody know what that is so that hopefully you all will stay till the end for that. Charles, you'll be particularly happy to hear this. I've been in touch with Ed Rao, another person. Ed Rao is the one who brought me to HiBR. Thank you. And he, although could not be attending today because he's out in Hawaii, he sent me a narrative prepared statement. Great. And I'm going to read that out, not now because it is 11:11. I'm going to read that out as part of our closing because it's a beautiful statement that he's put together. It's a call to action. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to our first track today. That's called Economics and Implementation. And the person who is running that track is none other than Jonathan Cohen of the Department of Energy, correct? Good if I had all of my things together. Yes. John Cohen, U.S. Department of Energy. He founded and leads the U.S. Department of Energy's Better Buildings Residential Network, a national membership of more than 430 residential energy efficiency programs and partners. He has been a champion for HiBR and with us for the longest time. And we thank you for moderating this session. I don't know why this thing.
Jonathan, we are having trouble hearing you on our side. Is that just me, guys, or can anyone else hear Jonathan?
I can't hear Jonathan. I cannot.
Check that. I was on mute, so pardon that. That would help.
Okay.
We should be much better now. Okay, thank you very much. And again, my name is Jonathan Cohen. I'm with your Department of Energy, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today with everybody. And we have a wonderful session for you concerning economics and implementation. Health and buildings is impacted by the reality of economics as well as human behavior, and this session will address the post-pandemic ramifications of work concerning indoor air quality and contagious diseases, the role behavioral economics brings to the implementation of environmental health initiatives, as well as addressing the social impact across the entire value chain of a project on all stakeholders. So we have a very, very impressive slate of speakers on this panel. Very, very appreciative of the time and the expertise that we have with us today. And we have three speakers who I'll be introducing and sharing with you today, who will share their expertise. We have Dr. Young Lee, Dr. Stan Finkelstein, and Rainey Shane, and they all bring very unique insights and expertise to the table. We'll start with Dr. Lee, who's been trained in indoor environment design, engineering, and sustainable building and health research. She's been focusing on three main areas in her research and practice over 2 decades, including health and well-being enhanced workplaces, indoor environmental quality, and user behavior experiences. She pioneers evidence-based practice founded on scientific data and technological advancement. In her recent research, she integrates wearable biosensors to understand the impacts of environmental stimuli and stressors on human cognitive functions and discomfort. And with that, we'll turn the floor over to Dr. Lee to start us off, and we will hold our questions until the end, at which time we will have a good conversation with all three speakers. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan, for such a wonderful introduction. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Jonathan, you'll need to stop sharing your screen first.
Not yet?
I'm not. Oh, here we go.
Yep. If Jonathan, you could stop sharing your screen, I believe.
Okay, that should do it.
There we go.
Oh, so now everybody sees my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Yes.
Good. Okay, I'm already sharing my screen. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Okay, thanks. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, that's great. Okay. So this presentation is based on my book chapter on behavioral economics and workplace behaviors. Unfortunately, masters of deviations, irrationalities, and biases refer to ourselves. Okay. When aiming to improve health outcomes in environments, we often pursue environmental interventions while lacking understanding on human factors and occupant behaviors. I've seen it. Implementing environmental interventions alone can be very expensive, but may not offer effective long-term solutions without considering human behaviors. Behavioral economics recognizes common cognitive biases, irrationalities, and deviations from desired behavioral patterns that often drive us to make non-economic decisions. So it can be used to develop strategies leveraging our own weaknesses and in natural cognitive process in decision making. This offers great advantages when implementing environmental health research outcomes to providing more economic solutions via policies that accommodate our natural behavioral patterns. In this presentation, I will discuss what implications behavioral economics can bring to the implementation of environmental health research. Behavior economics, BE in short, integrates cognitive psychology to economics to understand the way that our cognition really works in economic decision-making and deliver the common cognitive biases underlying irrational behaviors. Based on the utility concept, previous economic models were created by the premise of impeccable rational humans when making decisions. These models have assumed that normal people, Homo sapiens, would behave the same way that Homo economicus, which means economic person, will exercise infinite rationalities and self-control for their best benefits of themselves. But BE acknowledges that psychology or cognition of normal Homo sapiens has flaws in reasoning and uses heuristics, instinct, and emotions in decision-making. BE suggests that we humans have bounded rationality that, and we make decisions based on various cognitive limitations. So the premise of BE builds upon understanding common cognitive biases, irrationalities, and deviations that normal people like myself and us exhibit, which often drive us to make decisions that are not in our best interest or beneficial to us. BE has been applied to various fields beyond economics and finance, including organizational psychology, business management, human resources, politics, and recently public health and workplace health and well-being to implement strategies to easily motivate people towards desired options. BE pays special attention to three aspects of our own behaviors: use of immediate cognitive resources, such as heuristics in decision-making, temporal aspects of judgment, and social influence on individual decision-making. Heuristics are mental shortcuts that we use to make fast and easy decisions on the limited time and information, like rule of thumb, educated guess, and trial and error. These tend to work pretty well in general, but also are subject to errors, especially in more complex situations. When heuristics induce systematic errors in judgment, bias tend to occur. When examining common human biases, BE acknowledges that we are more perceptive to the present time, not future, not past, and constantly influenced by the social context and norms. Okay, so the first topic in this presentation is status quo and loss aversion bias, focusing on heuristics and bias. The status quo simply means the preference, our preference of no changes or remaining the same status as before, even if it requires only tiny little efforts or costs, or even we are aware of the benefits from the changes. There may be several reasons behind this bias, but especially uncertainty drives people to gravitate to already known safe methods to avoid risks. People also tend to regret more when the results are bad from our new actions than from no actions. This is due to our innate negativity bias. The negativity bias leads us to evaluate loss and gain unequally. We tend to perceive losses more regrettably than we appreciate the same amount of gains from a decision. According to this bias, people tend to commit to the potential gain only when it doubles the amount of potential loss. This means that people are not motivated enough to change or select a new option without sufficient incentives that outweigh the potential loss from the change. Due to this concern with the loss, when information is presented in a negative, which is a loss, frame, like a 10% failure rate, instead of a positive, which is gain, a frame, like 90% of success rate, people may perceive the consequences more seriously. This is called the framing effect, referring to a tendency of us that whose decisions are affected by how the information is presented to us. The second topic in this presentation is optimism, bias, and overconfidence, which is, to me, very beneficial to us researchers. When people evaluate the probability of positive versus negative consequences of an event, people tend to become more optimistic regardless of past experience. This is called optimism bias. Like smokers tend to believe that somehow they will never get a lung cancer and keep smoking. The funny thing about this bias is that we tend to think this way regardless of past experiences and abundant information readily available. The optimism bias leads us to be overconfident when evaluating our own capability. So overconfidence becomes problematic when we overrate our performance and commit to certain plans above beyond our true ability. We tend to falsely believe that my ability and performance are better than they actually are. And my ability and performance are better than others. And my knowledge or information is more accurate than other people have. So, for instance, in a study, 80% of drivers rated themselves as above average, 80%. And another study says 94% of college professors rated themselves as above average. And we know this, that's not how average works. We can't all be above average. An interesting fact is that people tend to underestimate their ability when tasks are easy or they are well experienced with the tasks, but overestimate when tasks are rather difficult. This is called the hard-easy effect in psychology. This is because when tasks are complex, we're not able to grasp or foresee all risks and difficulties. So a lack of information and experience contribute to our overconfidence in a way. The third topic in this presentation is herd behavior and social norm, focusing on the social aspects of human decision-making. We're constantly affected by other people's opinions and social trends in forming our own opinions and making decisions. Instead of being independent decision makers, we, social animals, tend to conform within the group we belong to. Social norms are generally accepted and experienced behaviors in a group or society. The members in the group or society feel not only pressure to follow the shared social norms, but also feel ashamed or guilty when not conforming to these norms. Since social norms define what behaviors are appropriate or acceptable within the group, they tend to be specific to the culture of the group. So let's talk about what's happening in the workplace then. A good example of status quo bias in the workplace is remaining the same environmental settings already in place instead of changing them to optimize the environment to respond to the fluctuating external stimuli. For instance, this is a known research by GSA. A reason for imbalance in daylight penetration into the workplace is due to people's inertia behavior. Once they close the shades to block out too much glare from the sunlight in the morning, they leave the window shades closed later in the day, even if there is not enough daylight. As resolutions for the status quo and loss aversion bias, we can provide default options for the best interests of employees, utilize framing effect to direct them to more desirable decisions for their own good, promote individual competence in decision-making, intervening with the negative bias and loss aversion bias, and providing alternative options and automated environment control with the cumbersome human interventions throughout the day can also contribute to potential issues from these biases. Optimism is in general harmless, but becomes problematic in the workplace when it is accompanied by overconfidence. This is because overconfidence leads to inaccurate judgments and projections in organizational planning. We tend to be overconfident when less experienced with the task, And when we make decisions alone without consulting others, we tend to be overconfident. The attitude of solely relying on only one source of information can easily lead to planning errors. It is argued that over 50% of projects are underestimated in budget, and also many people underestimate time, especially 30%, approximately 30% less time for easy to moderate projects, and even up to 50% less time for complex to very complex projects. However, planning fallacy tends to happen even when the information on precedents is already available. This is because we take an inside view where we focus on the uniqueness of the task or issue and disregard past experiences, as opposed to an outside view where we contemplate other factors affecting the task or issue. Since planning fallacy is persistent regardless of precedent information and outside views available, it may be wise to embrace our weaknesses and focus on modifying the projection of required resources or solutions by establishing a standardized procedure of adding safety margins and incorporating other available information and outside views and opinions in determining necessary resources or solutions. So our approach to health research can really benefit from this by listening to other expertise to suggest meaningful solutions. The concept of social norms has recently been utilized as a cost-effective approach to motivating people to engage in behavioral changes for sustainability and health promotion in the workplace. Also, utilizing descriptive social norm messages has proven to be a powerful tool to promote desirable behaviors. For instance, displaying signs in your elevators to encourage stair climbing instead of using elevators showed that nearly 50% of people switching to using stairs from elevators in a study. While social norm messaging and nudging can be used for rather simpler problems and solutions, in order to solve more complex problems and suggest solutions, such as health in buildings, a combination of supports from various disciplines is absolutely necessary. This is because solving a complex problem requires a multi-dimensional approach, since a singular approach has failed too many times so far, and we know that. In addition, we need to further understand different impacts from proposed solutions and changes on various individuals and diverse personal traits, and just how individual brains are wired differently, how I am different from you and them. So this is very important perspective. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I'm gonna share my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Really appreciate those insights and all of your thoughts and the work that has gone into that. Again, we will be holding our questions until the end of the session. So I would encourage people to actually consider the questions they want to ask about Dr. Lee's presentation right now and put it down while it's fresh in your mind. So when we get to the question and answer session, you will be able to ask your questions and not think, oh, what was that I wanted to ask 40 minutes ago? So with that, thank you again, Dr. Lee, who again will be rejoining us for the Q&A. And now we're going to move on to our second speaker, and it gives me pleasure to introduce Dr. Stan Finkelstein, who is a senior research scientist at the Institute for Data, Systems, and Society at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. He also serves as a member of the faculty at the Harvard-MIT Division of Health Sciences and Technology and of the Division of Clinical Informatics at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Dr. Finkelstein is the founding director of the combined MD and MBA program at Harvard. Dr. Finkelstein is a specialist in outcomes research. His areas of research extend to the business-government interface related to medical technology, clinical research design, and third-party reimbursement as well. and his publications address the role of advancing science and technology in changing patterns of medical treatment. And with that, I'm very pleased to turn the floor over to Dr. Finkelstein. Dr. Finkelstein, the floor is yours.
Jonathan, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And as I share my screen, I suggest that I'm going to be talking about something that's very different from what we just heard. Do you see my shared screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to talk about a home toolkit to improve the quality of indoor air. And the work that I'm going to talk about was originally done some years ago in a different context. And one of my colleagues who had a hand in organizing this particular meeting thought that a reframing of what we did research on just a few years ago might be of interest to a group such as this one that's focused on health and buildings. So this is a listing of the members of the multidisciplinary research team. We conducted this work a little over 10 years ago. And you see that Dick Larson, my faculty colleague, and Karima Tumalina, who was our doctoral student, their field is operations research. And for anyone who may not be familiar with operations research, it's an engineering field where the stock and trade of much of what it involves and what we used in our work is mathematical modeling. And many of the papers that we developed as part of this particular activity were in fact mathematical. But sometimes genuine insights emerge from this kind of work that didn't require the math. And it's those kinds of results that I'm going to be talking about today. The context for this original work was for the primary prevention of influenza in the home by individuals and families. And we were conducting this work in 2008 and 2009 during the pandemic of the swine influenza. We wrote the paper in 2010 and it was published a year later. And specifically what we were looking at is in a situation which we found ourselves in more recently with COVID, when individuals came down in large numbers with this condition. The hospitals, emergency rooms, and so on were overwhelmed by the surge, and many individuals needed to be cared for at home. And the question that we posed at that time was, given the likelihood that there would be individuals who would potentially transmit the disease at home, what could be done to the indoor air, to the house situation in order to mitigate those risks? And just parenthetically here, the journal, which eventually published this article, thought that this was such a unique paper for the kinds of things that they usually published, that they designated this for continuing education credit for physicians and asked us to write some test questions that doctors could take. Well, in any case, in the reframing, what I'm attempting to do here is to examine a broader context than the flu pandemic in which we considered. The interventions that I will describe that I'm sure all of you are familiar with would be expected to be similarly effective for regular, any other kinds of contaminants of indoor air. And again, to focus on what steps individuals, families, and so on can take to, by themselves, to improve the quality of indoor air in their homes. And sources of indoor air contamination, among these are what comes in from the outdoor air, what is in this indoor spaces as a result of the building infrastructure, behaviors of the individuals who are in those spaces, such as cooking or adverse behaviors like smoking, or individuals who come in and out who are sick and who might be shedding infectious material. And the mechanisms of the interventions which we'll look at are mechanical barriers, physical changes, and chemical or biological changes. And looking at mechanical barriers, HEPA filtration, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, could do a very good job of removing particles from the air, as long as these particles are big enough that they don't pass through the filter. And these HEPA filters can be used in homes pretty easily that have forced-tied air systems or heat pumps. And for those who may not have those kinds of systems, there are opportunities to use these filters in devices that may filter the air in particular rooms. Exhaust fans, another mechanical barrier, work by creating negative pressure and to remove particles and gases. And then, not so important for the context that we're talking about today, but was important in the context of respiratory infectious diseases, high quality face masks do have the potential to serve as a mechanical barrier. In terms of chemical and biological change agents, ultraviolet light offers multiple benefits. The C wavelength is antimicrobial and can inactivate pathogens. And also UV light can neutralize volatile organic compounds. And potentially, if there's a way to use ultraviolet light in a fashion that the air for home ventilation is passed through it, that would be even better. And of course, these items are easy to find in consumer stores. The physical change agent, within a comfort range, higher humidity and temperature are consistent with reduced particles of all kinds. Higher humidity is also generally associated with lower ozone levels. And there's an extra benefit of temperature and humidity control that it can be better for host defenses. And here's just a table that categorizes these potential interventions and what they can do potentially for indoor air. And droplet nuclei specifically are respiratory infectious particles that may emerge when somebody sneezes or coughs or even talks. And these particles are airborne for some distance and potentially pick up moisture from the air and then settle on surfaces. So how much do these interventions cost? So originally we had 2010 prices. I just tried to gross them up a little bit based on my sense of inflation and so on. And here is a list of HEPA filters. You could get something cheap for just a room air purifier, or something more expensive for the whole home. Exhaust fans, UV light systems, or variable humidifiers, as you see. And the total that we're looking at for these interventions, as little as a few $100s and as most as a couple $1,000s. So then the question is, are they worth it? And here's where my suggestion that the math wasn't particularly needed for this kind of analysis. From the perspective of an individual in their home, if one were able to prevent a single person from getting sick with COVID, wouldn't that be worth it? Or a single case of asthma from occurring or from getting worse, or from terms of longer term exposures, whether heart disease or cancer might possibly be prevented. And then in another metric that can be used to examine worth is how many days of school or work absence would be needed for something like this to be worthwhile. And then the question is social impact. So many would find the benefits to be comfortably affordable and to outweigh the costs. But for some people, those numbers of costs that I had just projected may not be easy to come by. Some people may not be able to easily afford these interventions. And here's where the possibility of public assistance programs or charitable organizations may come into it. And I close by just referencing a set of studies that Jonathan Levy, who leads a team of environmental health scientists at the Boston University School of Public Health, is engaged in, where they focused as context on specific public housing in the South End of Boston. And the first question that a lot of people were asking, again, using public assistance funds, was if somebody were to do the kind of interventions that would improve the energy consumption, make the building green, for example, what would there be benefits associated with those costs? But Levy and his team went further in several of these papers, and using mathematical models, raised the question of not only do you make these buildings green, but you do interventions that also make the building, the indoor air healthier. And he established, using the math, that these interventions easily paid for themselves. So my suggestion is, in a reframed context, that these kind of interventions in the home provide relatively low cost interventions that individuals, family members can perform to improve the quality of indoor air, both to prevent respiratory infectious diseases such as COVID or flu, but also asthma, and potentially have impact on exposure, which create these diseases in the longer term. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Finkelstein. We really appreciate that presentation and the very interesting work that you and your colleagues have done. And again, we are going to take questions at the end of the session. So now is the time to think about what you would like to ask Dr. Finkelstein when we get to that point, so you have your question ready when we start in. And we are now going to move on to our third and final speaker before we open it up for questions. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Rainey Shane, who is the Social Sustainability Director for JLL, where she manages social sustainability consulting services around social impact strategy for commercial real estate. She is also tasked with quality management of the SEAM certification consulting. SEAM stands for Social Equity Assessment Method, and is a standard for addressing impacts to the human stakeholders of a commercial real estate project. The objective of a SEAM certification is to mitigate negative impact as well as enhance opportunities for positive impacts and sustainable outcomes that contribute to long-term systemic changes in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, human rights, and prosperity. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Rainey Shane. Rainey, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jonathan. All right, let me get my
You're very
screen going.
Okay.
All right, can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Okay, so as Jonathan announced, I am going to talk to you about the SEAM certification, and it is a brand new certification that is launching at the end of this year. It stands for Social Equity Assessment Method, and the idea is really focused on the social equity around the built environment. So about 4 years ago, I was leading the adaptive reuse unit for JLL. So I'm development manager, project manager. I lead large and small scale development projects. And what we were seeing is that there was a demand from the developer side, the project owner side, wanting to do something in the social equity space or the social impact space and not really knowing what they wanted to do. And understanding that commercial real estate projects directly impact so many different stakeholders that historically have not been addressed in the activities of a commercial real estate project. And there have been limitations on the positive social outcomes of a real estate project because there's never been a strategic way to really manage that impact. Obviously, the demand is starting to grow now, and more people are paying attention to that. But companies were struggling to create a social impact strategy. There was not an international or even a recognized alignment on what should they do in social impact. And even if they could figure out what programs they wanted to address in their real estate project, there wasn't really a framework to measure it. And, GRI started coming out, starting to align the global community a bit more around what is social equity, how do we measure it? But we still saw a gap in that area. So we set out to try to fix that gap. And what we came up with is a social impact certification as it relates to the built environment. And it is a third-party verification of the social sustainability measures for internationally accepted standards. These standards have been around for decades, but there hasn't been a real focus on how do we practically apply those in the commercial real estate space. And so our work over the past 4 years is how do we take these internationally accepted standards, laws, covenants, compacts, and create a roadmap for owners and developers to be able to apply them to their real estate project. And, you know, we started doing this about two or 3 years ago, and it was really this haphazard application where, you know, someone knew a nonprofit that said, oh, well, we need to look at diversity and inclusion, or someone else said, oh, well, we need to look at human rights. And really it was the loudest voice that got the attention of the developers. And they said, you know, we need to do something in this space. Or a developer had a specific cause that they were very tied to. So they tied some of their activities aligned with what they felt like the community needed. And so the idea that we have developed over the past 4 years is, what is the right way to apply social equity? And it's an incredibly simple concept. It's not easy to do, but the concept is simple. And that is, you must manage the impact for all of the activities. So looking at it that way, commercial real estate has a lot of activities and they directly impact people. And it is the responsibility of the project owner to mitigate the harm that is created if there is a negative likely impact from the project. And then ideally to enhance any benefits or positive outcomes that could be created with their commercial real estate project. We thought, well, let's not reinvent the wheel, right? Like I said, these concepts and standards have been around for decades. So we created a standard and a scorecard that was focused on 4 pillars of social equity, and that is responsibility, impact, accountability, and justice. And we essentially created 8 different concepts around these 4 pillars that were aligned to supporting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They were aligned with what GRI was saying about how do we report and measure this, aligned to ISO 26000, ISO 30415, which is the new one that came out last year around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we took all of these standards and created a practical application or a roadmap for owners to follow that allow them to use social science methodology to work through a social impact program. And so our scorecard is a typical scorecard where you do an activity, you get some points, you add it all up. So there's this vertical component, you add it all up, and the bottom tells you how many points you got, and that tells you what level of certification. But there's also this horizontal nature to our scorecard where we're looking at each of those 8 concepts as being objectives. And each objective has an impact thesis and a theory of change that allows us to design the inputs, the activities, measuring the outputs, and then tying those outputs to true outcomes, which are shorter term benefits, and then ultimately to long-term sustainable benefits. And one of the social science methodologies that we use is the 5 dimensions of impact, and the impact goals for that are ABC, which are act to avoid harm, benefit stakeholders, and contribute to sustainable solutions. And so we align the levels of our scorecard to those impact goals. And bronze starts looking at how do we make progress in an area, even if we don't reach the threshold of good enough or break even. Silver intended to mitigate the harm or any negative likely impacts from a commercial real estate project. Gold starts to layer in benefiting stakeholders, even if it's a short-term positive outcome. And then platinum starts looking at how do we increase capacities and create longer-term sustainable solutions that once the real estate project team goes away, or even if the building stops operating, that these benefits would live on. So this is a look at those 4 social pillars that I talked about and the 8 concepts that they cover. And under social responsibility, we've got transformational governance. And I say transformational versus organizational governance because we really need to ensure that we are looking at action versus commitment. And there's a big push now, even in the UN SDGs, that is really starting to push people towards creating impact through action versus commitment and policy. Community involvement, community development are all under social responsibility and are all rooted in ISO 26000 concepts. So, and ISO 26000 is social responsibility. So the second one is social impact. And this is the really interesting piece because we cannot prescribe a solution, and especially for a global certification, which we're intending to be, we can't prescribe a solution if we don't understand what the issue is. And so the social impact assessment is a key piece to the process we use because we have to understand the community, we have to understand the stakeholders, and not only just who are the stakeholders, but what is the severity and the importance of the impacts to those stakeholders. Because as we know, each stakeholder experiences impacts at different severity levels. So the social impact seeks to customize the plan that is created through the certification process that really focuses on exactly what this community, what these stakeholder groups need. The social justice section is looking at inclusive procurement. So that's part of our DEI initiatives around project team, looking at what types of initiatives can we implement that will start to create and increase capacities from a social justice perspective. And then the social justice innovation is innovation credits that help elevate the commercial real estate industry in general. And then the last pillar is social accountability. And this is probably, you have to say, I don't have a favorite kid, but this is my favorite kid, social accountability, because it looks at human rights and it looks at modern slavery. And part of my nonprofit work outside of this nonprofit is I belong to a lot of nonprofits, and we're all former military or law enforcement special forces, and we travel around the world and we rescue children out of forced labor situations. And so we pull kids out of brick fields in Southeast Asia a lot. And I couldn't remedy going and rescuing kids from brick fields and then coming home and managing commercial real estate projects, which were contributing to me having to go rescue these kids. So I thought, well, how do we address the root source of the problem? And that's eliminate the demand for materials and products that have human rights abuses in their supply chain. And so that is the most complicated and complex lift of the certification. And so we're looking towards technologies in blockchain, AI, machine learning that start to help us break down how do we create transparency in that supply chain and how do we start to mitigate those negative impacts. And then health and safety in the workplace, we have to throw that in there because the built environment has a direct impact on people. However, it is our intent that we are going to push and motivate those to go seek WELL certifications or FITWEL or any other health and safety certification, and that those would be crosswalks for that section of the scorecard. And then last but not least, this is our big, hairy, audacious goals at SEAM. If you're a Stephen Covey fan, decreasing or eliminate modern slavery, increase the prosperity for every single stakeholder of a project, not just the shareholders, not just the owners. And then ultimately through sustainable development, we'll create socially equitable communities. And that is my time. Thank you for allowing me to present, and I hope this was helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rainey. That was really interesting. We appreciate the presentation and all that went into it. And now, again, is the time, while that presentation is fresh in your mind, to think of the questions you would like to ask Rainey, as well as our other presenters. And we do have questions that have come in on the chat. And before I get to those, I just want to share with everybody something that was asked earlier, which is that, yes, the presentations as well as the recordings from yesterday and today will be made available to all of the participants in this event. Timing to be determined, but that is an understandable question, and we did want to share that so everybody knows. And let's see, we have so questions for our presenters. Dr. Finkelstein, you said the methods in Jonathan Levy's experiment concerning occupant health more than paid for themselves. Can you share more about that? Why were the gains so effective, and what could others learn from that to incorporate into their programs?
First of all, I don't feel that I'm qualified to describe Jonathan Levy's excellent work in great detail. But the original idea was that what had been promoted by a number of public policies, right, or the question that had been raised by a number of public policies was whether there could be benefits financially to making buildings green by improving the energy efficiency of various buildings. And what he added to that, or his team added to that, was if you consider that there are a number of adverse behaviors that people engage in part of these, the way they live, particularly if you're talking about smoking, but others that generate particles and maybe other kinds of pollutants in their spaces, that if you improve the ventilation, for example, and maybe some other interventions that head in that direction, there's a significant cost associated with that. But then what benefits do you get? And they made use of various databases that projected asthma cases by various demographic characteristics, and looked at other details of how those could be reduced based on indoor and outdoor measurements in various places. And what they found was that there would be significant reduction in these adverse outcomes, and then they attached some monetary values to these. So I mean, that's the kind of work that they engaged in. But I say I would rather defer to a member of that team to talk in detail about what they did. In terms of would that be beneficial for others to engage in? We are now, John is a new colleague, and we're talking about looking at some of those similar questions in a different context, in the context of senior living, and whether or not we can find that basically the same sorts of interventions lead to the same sorts of benefits.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate that response. And before we go on to our next question, I'll just share that in the chat, we have a very good response to Shani's presentation. Dr. Angela Loader says, Rainey, really interesting. Would love to connect with you further on this. And this is exactly the kind of interaction that this event is designed to facilitate. And also just want to add it was a pleasure working with Dr. Loader from the Well Institute on a previous Health and Buildings Roundtable event that was in person before the pandemic. And I will now pivot to Dr. Lee and ask, with your expertise in sensors and human behavior, what would you suggest that institutions need to manage to balance privacy concerns with the gains that can come from gathering such data on human behavior?
Just from my over 20 years of research in environment, especially indoor environment, I've done a lot of studies with the occupants using different various methods, starting like with survey and objective measurement. I've used all the indoor environment quality, like measurement sensors to measure daylight, amount of daylight, or even like acoustics, amount of ambient noise, reverberation, all these things. But I came to conclusion, if we don't consider human occupant behaviors, we can't really suggest meaningful solutions. We may end up spending a lot of expenses, costs, but in the end, they may not follow what we expected. We designers, engineers say many times, if we build this way, if we design this way, will they use this way? No, of course not. And I had a conversation with an engineer recently complaining about human behaviors sitting on a flat surface that didn't have enough structural support for people to sit on. And of course, the engineer was upset, and why do they sit on this? Don't they know, blah, blah, blah. And then I told him that you need to understand human psychology and behaviors. And without that, you can't really provide solutions. Human psychology, if they see a flat surface, they feel like to sit down. If they see a big horizontal structure, they like to feel leaning against this structure. It's just like a human nature. So this type of conversations I've had with a lot of scientists, and then I had also engineering background, but it came to this conclusion that without understanding human occupants, the solutions are going to be very expensive. So that's kind of where I came from to suggest that this framework, looking at the behavioral economics, and then how we bridge human psychology and engineering and science all together. And in the past experience in research with the GSK, we've done some acoustics analysis for them. And then what we discovered was we employed different methods. So one was survey. And then we had objective measurements, like environmental sensors. And we also used the EDA that engages human, the biorhythm sensor that measures sweat gland. So what we discovered was there was a discrepancy between what people said in the survey and then what we discovered in the biosensors. So my suggestion is people may not aware or know what they are experiencing, and they may say one thing over another. But if we are not aware of this whole experience, how this whole experience comes from, and how they analyze within their mind and brain without knowing our own cognitive limitations, research is up to me. Research is have a hard time suggesting real solutions. So to me, combination of different tools, so we can hear them, how they feel, and then how they analyze their own feelings and then emotions, and then invite them all together. And we can also employ different sensors to look at objective aspects of human emotions or cognition, and even environmental sensors all together, and then we can analyze what this all means. Then I think that was my approach in a couple of years to research.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that response.
Thank you.
And now a question for our other speaker, to Rainey. The structure of standards is essential to avoid a wild west of unsustainable activity that does not take into account human impacts from the built environment. But the take-up of such standards can be slow. What do you feel is needed, aside from the potential for mandating through, say, legislation, for example? What do you feel is needed to reach scale for SEAM certification?
That's a great question, because obviously we don't change the world unless we scale, right? So first of all, I did forget to mention that SEAM is a nonprofit that sits outside of JLL. It is an agnostic certification, not a JLL service, which everyone that we've talked to at JLL and throughout the CRE industry agrees that it needs to be agnostic in order to scale. The second piece about regulation's coming, right? It always starts in Europe and then it moves west. And there's a lot of regulation being imposed in Europe. It's coming here. It's starting more on the West Coast. But what we're doing is we're working with regulatory agencies in the cities where we're doing pilot projects, and they are committing to make SEAM mandatory requirement for public incentives for commercial real estate projects. So tax allocation districts, opportunity zones, if there are any incentives that they control, SEAM would need to be a requirement of that developer. So that's part of how we're starting to institute some regulation. And then the other thing that I'll say is I was incredibly pleasantly surprised when we started introducing this to the CRE community a few years ago, that the demand was so great. We thought that we would be up against a massive trying to convince them, trying to find statistics. But with the advent of ESG and ESG being so popular, the reason it's so popular is that impact investing funds go to the higher rated ESG companies, because it's been shown that higher ESG scores relate to higher profit margin and lower volatility for that company. So it all comes down to money. And, you know, luckily the millennial and the Gen Z population demands this. And ultimately, the social equity initiatives and the bottom line profit are inextricably linked right now. And I don't know if it will always be that way, but we're going to strike while the iron is hot and try to get as many projects certified as possible. We do have interest all over the globe, from Asia Pacific, Europe, and certainly in the Americas. Some incredibly large major occupiers and large developers are signing on to do pilot projects. We are in the pilot project phase right now. We will have case studies to share, hopefully Q1 of next year. And that's how we intend to scale, is using a model that LEAD and WELL have perfected, and that is creating SEAM accredited professionals that can guide companies through the SEAM certification process. We've also tried to make it as simple as possible so that even a bronze and possibly even silver would not need an accredited professional, that our guidebook could walk them through the process to do a social impact strategy correctly. And that's how we intend to scale.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that response. Really appreciate it. I just want to check in terms of time with Kumkum and and Christopher, our colleagues here on this conference, because I think we're at time, but I just want to see if we have space for another question, or if I think we are at time, we need to probably move on. Is that correct?
Jonathan, you're doing wonderfully on time. Thank you for how you're moderating this. We can go until 12:20, which is when we will have our wellness break.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you. Then we do have time for some more questions. Thank you for that. And Jane Ward asked a question for Dr. Finkelstein. She says she really appreciates your focus on the toolkit for homeowners to improve IAQ during pandemics and beyond. She has done that kind of work herself during COVID, working with small businesses and nonprofit owners to understand the importance and often very low cost affordable approaches to improving IAQ that can be helpful not only for COVID, but beyond concerning other pollutants. And she asks, are you aware of any public health or community, let's see, she asks, excuse me, are you aware of any efforts to take that approach and apply it at the community level in terms of your strategy? Dr. Finkelstein?
So unfortunately, not recently. So this research was supported in part by the CDC, and they knew that we were working on this. So back in 2010, there was some interest on the part of the CDC about the possibility that they might generate some initiatives in this regard. But then I suppose after the swine flu pandemic petered out, interest was not maintained in this kind of thing. And then a year later, when this was published, as I hinted at before, the journal that published this, one of the American Medical Association journals, thought this was a unique kind of result to be publishing compared to the articles that they usually publish. And they specifically made it something for which the doctors could get continuing education credit in the hopes that they would stimulate some of this activity. But again, unfortunately, nothing significant materialized.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that response. Joyce Lee asked a question for Rainey. Under human rights, she wonders if SEAM is also using the Design for Freedom principles. She said she understands the State Department is beginning to use it in their projects, and she wonders if other federal agencies might be using it as well.
We are deeply impressed with Grace Farms and their Design for Freedom principles, and we've been following them for a while. And it's interesting because a lot of the conversations that I have had the offer to be introduced to their founder multiple times, and I haven't done it yet, and I want to, because I think their framework is fantastic. A lot of the resources that they list in their toolkit are definitely baked into our standards and our scorecards. And I'm not sure about the federal level at that point. I've not been connected to anyone at the federal level or heard of social equity type programs at the federal level. But after your question, I will definitely look into it more deeply. But yes, great. The Design for Freedom information and principles are definitely covered in our scorecard.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that reply. I appreciate that. And thank you for that question. And I'll turn now to Dr. Lee and ask you, moving ahead, as we look to have this event have an impact on what people will do as they walk away, if you were to look down the road into your crystal ball, into the future of how behavior is taken into account in the work that we're discussing, what do you feel, if there's one thing, one approach that can advance the consideration of behavior into work, so it's not just a focus on, say, technology, which often happens at the Department of Energy. We are very technology focused, and behavior is not something that is considered in nearly the same way. What would you say would help advance the field in the context of taking into account behavior? If you were to say one thing to the participants in this event, what would that takeaway be?
That is a too broad question. I don't even know if I can give you one. I'm wondering, the asking for one is our problem, because we tend to focus on, is there one frame that can solve everything? Can we can you find something that's going to work for everything? It's like one size fits all. I think that's kind of a utility concept we tend to have in our mind. Is there something like that? It's like infinite. The answer to this question, is there something like infinite? No, I don't think so, because humans are not infinite. So I don't know if I can give you one answer, but we have to be aware, really aware how we'll embrace, we don't think how others will embrace. We have to ask ourselves how I will embrace, because even I point out this among our faculty when I was at UCL a couple of years ago, University College London. I was a faculty there for 2 years, and there were a lot of environmental engineers and then sustainability the experts, but I saw the discrepancy in their own personal life, and when they talk and when they suggest solutions in their papers. So the question that I always bring up to myself is, when I create my frame or when I suggest the solutions, instead of asking, I started even rewriting my writing style. Instead of saying, people tend to do them or themselves, instead of studying, instead of referring to others, I started talking to myself. We tend to do, I tend to do. What is the solution to me? If I were suggested to do this, will I think that creates a lot of conversations when we develop either framework or solutions. So I think that's the most important thing at this point. And then I suggested people have different, personal traits. And then even though we talked about neurodiversity, just brains are just wired very different way. The spectrum is very broad. And some people will think this way, some people will think that way. This is important, that way, that's important. And then we know the engineers, the way engineers think is different from designers or musicians. So I think that's also important. My approach from engineer's point of view, it makes all sense. And we could come to the conclusion. But if we see how it's done in reality, how other people use the space or the items and the goods, we know there's a gap. So the question I bring up is, can we change? Asking, can I do it? What does that mean to me?
Okay.
Can I? Yeah. So that's it. I think that'll create a lot of conversations between us.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I think last question will be from Dr. Angela Loader to Dr. Finkelstein, who expresses appreciation for your work. And she asks if you've done any work on sustainability and humidity links. For example, air conditioning creates a drier indoor environment, but it's very popular where she is out in Denver, even though evaporative coolers use less energy and also increase humidity. It sounds like this would be great concerning energy incentives and public health promotion regarding respiratory viruses and the like. Dr. Finkelstein, do you have any thoughts on Dr. Loader's comments?
Well, that could be something that new colleagues and I consider doing going forward. This piece of work that I presented today was sort of an accidental foray into indoor air considerations related to health. So there really wasn't any follow-up at that time. But the questions that that she raises sound like interesting ones to think about going forward.
Okay, thank
Mr.
you
Kumkum?
very much.
Yep.
Yes.
I just
Okay,
took a look at
so-
the clock. We're a couple of minutes past our 12:20.
Great.
This has been a
Thank you.
riveting discussion.
Thank you, everybody.
here. I thank you very much, Jonathan, for moderating an excellent session. I'd like to thank all the speakers. At this point, let's take a wellness break till 12:25. I'd say let's make it till 12:26-ish or so, give a couple of minutes. And then we will restart with track 2, thinking through emerging technology. Thank you, everybody. Okay, just being respectful of everybody's time and staying on track here. I'd like that we get started with the second track this afternoon. This track is called Thinking Through Emerging Technology. I'm going to read the abstract about this as Chris and Lan and folks are getting the other parts teed up here. Let's talk about emerging technologies that impact the health, well-being, and safety of inhabitants. The 90% of populations who live and work in and around the built environment, and how new technologies relate to climate change, COVID, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, affecting the health and well-being of people inhabiting buildings. In order to solve those problems, they must first be identified, analyzed, quantified, and verified. Every building has a place, a surrounding, a strength and/or vulnerability, a composition, an exterior and interior, and a need for the health, well-being, safety, productivity, sustainability, and comfort of the inhabitants and protection of the environment. Our esteemed panelists are working in all these areas with new emerging technologies to find and fix the gaps, the problems to make connections and collaborations to complete the life cycles to implementation, to practice, management and proliferation towards health, sustainability, and equity. So the moderator for this session is actually Susan Permit. She is with NIH. She's the website's manager overseeing the public and internal website and communication for the Office of Research Facilities at NIH. She has a wealth of experience both at NIH and with HiBR. She's been a long timer. But she is not actually going to be moderating this. She's got as a co-moderator, Mohammed. And let me read a little bit about Mohammed. Mohammed Eli Eltman, he's with Yale. He's a research scientist at the Yale Center for Ecosystems and a lecturer at the Yale School of Architecture. Is Mohammed on the call at this time? I'm going to go ahead and put that out there to Chris. Chris, can you either give a thumbs up or a no?
I am.
My
I'm
apologies.
here.
All right, Mohammed, welcome. Glad to see you. Okay, so given that you are here, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to you so that you can introduce yourself with a little bit more gusto here and introduce your panelists and your track. So Mohammed, over to you. Thank you, and Susan, for co-moderating this session today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here today with us. I just wanted to start by thanking Susan Perman. She helped us a lot and she worked a lot on how this panel will be shaped, and hopefully you'll be excited about whatever we're going to present, and also we're going to have an interesting discussion thereafter. I am, as Kumkum introduced, I am a research scientist at Yale Center for Ecosystems and Architecture, and I'm currently a lecturer for the School of Architecture. So I'm an architect. I started with, I'm from Egypt, so I started my studies in Egypt. I moved to the US and I started to work more. My research started to become more focused on the tool that I'm going to be talking about today. And it's looking at incorporating built environment data, human health and well-being data, as well as building systems data. Prior to joining YLC Center, I was working with the CASE Center for Ecosystems and Architecture at RPI and SOM, which I think I'm going to briefly talk about it. So I can, let me first, Susan had prepared a kind of an introduction for our session. So I'm going to go through it, and then I'm going to kickstart our presentation. So, we're going to talk about emerging technologies for this session. Some of these examples, artificial intelligence, big data, geospatial thinking, biochemical and wearable sensors, climate change, that impact with the focus of impacting the health, well-being and safety of inhabitants, the 92% of populations who live and work in and around the built environment, and how new technologies relate to climate change, COVID, diversity, equity, and inclusion, of course. In order to solve these problems, they must be first identified, analyzed, quantified, and verified. Every building has a place, a surrounding, strengths and or vulnerability, a composition, an exterior, an interior, and the need for health, well-being, safety, productivity, and sustainability, comfort of the inhabitants, and protection of the environment. Our esteemed panelists are working all in these areas with new emerging technologies to find and fix the gaps, the problems, to have connections, collaborations to complete the life cycle to implementation practice, management, and proliferation towards health, sustainability, and equity. Let me share screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about SAVA, the tool. The tool is trying to, how can the process of architecture design benefit from the socio-ecological visual analytics? So this is kind of a prompt that we start with it. I'm just going to start with kind of a statement. It is becoming increasingly clear that the contributions from many disciplines are needed in order to understand the complex problems posed by climate change and resource degradation. Therefore, novel interdisciplinary approaches are increasingly thought from designers, scientists, researchers, and policymakers. However, the conventional methods for sharing data information do not provide sufficient support for collaborations across disparate fields, fostering uncertainty in the discourse due to an array of factors, including discrepancies in the quality and quantity of data sets and models. As I mentioned earlier, I started from Egypt, so this is when I moved in. So this is where I came from. To me, this is kind of, I'm using it as a representation of the third world and how construction and the built environment is right now versus when I moved to the US. I started to look into these, which like these buildings, the class buildings, and how this is kind of an aspiration from the third world to reproduce these international kind of buildings. But we kind of that comes with a price. You can see that from the changes in the global surface temperature, and these curves are, the discussion will happen soon in Egypt for the COP26, like the climate change and how we can address it, and the 2 degrees, 1.5, and how we can, and we have, so soon as I joined, I started my graduate studies, and we started to look into, the center, the case center. We were looking at all these different systems, and these are how ways architects and scientists are trying to actually address the built environment in relation to human health, or even into materials and other aspects. But from that, these are separate kind of ways of separate. So we tried to look into them from a kind of an ecosystemic perspective. I'm just trying to lay the problem. But we need to put the human in the center, because this is all of that we're trying to say, how all these systems and how we're reshaping our built environment is going to affect us or affect our growth. Going back to this point, like all of these different methods and approaches, we need to consider interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, and other ways to bring more discussions and more fields and more experts into the discussion, into the field, in order to have bigger impact. A little bit of the challenge, so we are trying to move from an extreme global to an extreme local conditions where they kind of affect each other, and they definitely are affected by them. So for just looking at wind surfaces, and how on a global level, it's changing and it's dynamic over time, and it's to dust and air quality, and how all of the different activities that we have in each of these locations is actually not just in vacuum, but it kind of also moves from whether it's dust or clouds or even smoke. It reaches other locations. You can see this highly in China and India versus the sandstorms moving from Africa to the US. And how that is all, on top of that, the global warming and how this is changing over time. So why did I start with these kind of provoking from my perspective? We would do a lot of work with the UN, for example, and so this is an example. This is a representation of how we try working with the UN. We try to represent the different SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, in relation to the different targets, and how how they can interrelate, how each we cannot look at each SDG in vacuum, because they somehow have a relationship to other SDGs in a way. And this is one way of how global organizations are grappling with how to link data, to gain knowledge from the big data that we have access to currently. A little bit of shift towards architecture and built environment. So this is a capture. This is a diagram trying to capture a little bit of some of the tools that we have to manage and go through on a kind of daily basis as architects and design builder. And each of these tools is kind of generating a set of data flows that we have to manage and somehow make sure that they can all feed into one another in order to have to utilize the information and the knowledge from one to feed into the other. So towards interacting the environments, we need to link the data and design knowledge. And just to take a step back and understand the workflow, from moving from the left here, we see like the traditional. We have the architect designing a brief, having a design, working with consultants, developers, and then we have a product. But hopefully, if we're the product, the architect will extract some information from how the design has affected the people and how the people, and then would somehow inform their future innovations or designs. But in fact, it's not that simple. It's more complicated. What we see in the center, it's bigger and larger scales of effort, and there are a couple of stops and iteration, and each one of them that we have something coming out of, like in terms of data sets or a product, which creates it more cumbersome. The tool is trying to be a user-friendly web tool that is based on organizing and linking these complex relationships within big data by putting the data in the center. So every discipline can have access to the facets or the aspects of each of them, but in a way it can relate within the bigger picture of how that's. So it can be argued, like, a little bit of kind of a precedence in how we came along to this. It can be argued that the primary concern of the built environment is extending and measuring architecture according to the humans. So Renaissance, starting from the Renaissance, the Vitruvian man, according to so the Vitruvian man has truly believed in putting the human in measure of all things. And so the Vitruvian man was very much part of this order and celebrated the need for proper proportions, putting the human in the center again. Moving to the 1900s, we see the Friedrich Kiesler is also looking at the kind of correlism diagram by trying to capture the three different environments, the technological environment versus the human environment and natural environment, but still the human is kind of an interrelation between them. So this is interesting because now we started to consider stuff around us, how it can affect us. So the proposed, the SEVA tool, web tool, is an attempt to provide analytical links between human social environments, the built environment, the bioclimatic flows, the natural environment, and human biomedical data. SEVA is extending and measuring according to the humans. So in a way, we're flipping, the hierarchy, while the humans is not at the center anymore, but the flux, the data is what the focus is about in order to make it more accessible and more wider. Again, so this is, from the global to local, we have all of these different scales, and at each of these scales, we have different ways of understanding and collecting information from it, from human biometrics and/or building sensors, outdoor urban sensors, or even from like a kind of a satellite. And the tool is trying to allow us to shift between these different scales in order to get the ability to contextualize our environments. So this is leading to ways of how we can communicate. So the idea is the tool, we're moving from mobile technologies, accessing the data at the tip of our hands, to maybe more like a deeper dive with like web platforms where we want to analyze more access, more provenance of the data, versus the physical and virtual, how we can actually create empathy. So this is a kind of a representation of how we wanted, we can use it for, let's say, a couple of years, we had the fires in Australia. So let's say policymakers or even decision makers can be, get the aspect of the severity of these conditions and be able to with the information available at the tip of their fingers, they can actually, analyze it more and take better decisions. So the tool is working on how we can achieve that. We have these 4 different modes. Like to organize the data, we need to be able to organize people and data around it, a deeper dive and discovery throughout the different facets, and then an analysis, how we can actually go deeper into each of these workflows and analyze them. And understand so one aspect of this data fitness is in a way to learn from, let's say, the food industry with these data fitness, food fitness tickets that we have on each thing, so we can actually compare and analyze the different data flows. So organizing people, it's an easy function that we allow us to understand who's actually looking at the same data sets, who's was part of developing this data stream. So we can actually allow for that discussion and be able to freely share your data, since it's you can easily back it up or discuss it more. Because it's interdisciplinary, so there are different ways of looking at the data. So you can analyze it by location, for example, per study, per question, in terms of methodology, for example, or even the different variables that we're focused on. And then developing on top of it, all of the simple or maybe even complex data visualization techniques that we can or we use to look and deep dive into it. So again, let's say we have one case, one project, we have all of these data streams from architecture, science, built environment, and other tool and the back end be aligned that will allow everyone to have access to it. I'm just going to go quickly through a couple of examples. Through different scales. So as I mentioned earlier, the human scale kind of approach. So this is one project we were working with the Gates Foundation under the Healthy Birth Growth, the HPGDKI, and knowledge integration. And this was a project looking at collecting data from epidemiological data, tracking children in the first 3 years of their life to address stunting. So the knowledge integration aspect was collecting these data sets from around the world and trying to just put them under one, realigning them again, reorienting them, and trying to understand whether there is, if you can focus, is it hygiene, is it nutrition, is it materials, built environment materials around us, what is actually, can we do that? So we worked with the team as architects to try to make it more accessible, because the interdisciplinarity of this was key. As I mentioned earlier, so this is, at the same time, we can easily compare 2 different studies or even go deeper into one. On the left-hand side, we see a kind of a clock, which is the 3 years kind of plotted since birth to see, tracking children, let's say at per Z-score, one of the metrics that the doctors and epidemiologists will track growth and try to address stunting. But at the same time, we can see it side by side to something that will put it into context. So which other studies are looking at the same variable? What are the parameters that can be affected or in relation to these? Who are the teams that actually collect these in response to each of these studies? And you can filter, zoom in, and analyze one or the other quickly. To even zooming on one kind of case or one individual and get more analysis over time or over growth, or even can compare that to expected trends. Again, so same project working with them. So this was a huge initiative. A lot of teams, different teams, were looking at it. Again, in order to people to share data, we need to make sure that they are properly represented. So each team is captured, linked to their own data sets, and we can also try to, on top of it, have some analytical tools to help us track the outcomes of each of these analyses, who have access to the data, how much time they use for it to analyze it, and other metrics. Shifting from this human scale, going back to architecture. So this is another way of trying, like another aspect of the data, capturing environmental data around us. And this is one of the kind of visualization that tries to use environmental, like the weather conditions around us, relying on these TMY3, like these weather files that exist for cities around the world, but trying to plot it not just for a linear graph, but at the same time to capture the cyclical aspect of, from January to December, and then we go back and on this kind of a climate clock, what we call clock. Again, it's the same aspects. If you can focus, you can zoom in, you can filter, let's say 1 month, 1 day, and you can try to understand on top of the human bioclimatic data, biomedical data, we have in there the different conditions and how this can affect us. I mentioned a bit earlier, we worked with the UN on a couple of projects. This is one of them. We were looking at this human, like this small house, this tiny house. So we were able to display a couple of sensors throughout the space to track the built environment conditions, the systems, how they're performing, as well as human biomedical, and how all of these are affecting us. It's kind of a capture of how carbon dioxide, air qualities, and throughout the space. My last kind of example, going again through the idea of a bigger picture. So with the UN, we're trying to go bigger and working on these situation rooms where we can actually start to align all of the existing data sets in order the policymakers can actually take decision and understand how the environment is affecting our decisions are affecting the environment. So this is a big project, and this is a big team, and we needed, in order to be able to deliver such an interdisciplinary tool, we needed the people from different disciplines, from architecture, building science, computer science, mathematics, interface design, and others, in order to be able to capture that. Thank you. Ask my colleague Christine Wakta to present next. Dr. Christine is an architect, urban designer, educator. Her focus is on geosciences, geospatial methods, advanced analytics, and gamifying principles for healthier design solutions. Her research includes geoscience and artificial intelligence, integration into design as a therapeutic process. Dr. Wakta founded geoedugaming.inc, along with other geospatial initiatives geared towards the intersection of geosciences plus game plus design education as a feeder for research in academia. For over 19 years, she taught and developed graduate and undergraduate level curriculums in architecture, interior design, urban ecology, and various digital courses. Her global background and training have afforded her to successfully implement her diverse skills set on cross-disciplinary collaborative platforms. As a visionary leader and influencer, she has developed a geo-enabled learning approach that fits the new digital learners and believes that an AI-enabled technology evolution has emerged as disruptive forces and should be embraced and used to intersect intelligence, automation, and geoscience with advanced robotics to tackle the increasingly complex challenges of the 21st century. So please, Dr. Christine, please.
Thank you so much, Mohamed. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Before that, I would ask the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. The discussion after. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. It's really a great pleasure. I'm going to try to share my screen and make sure that, can you view my screen? Oops, I think I need to go in. I'm trying to get my PowerPoint to be on presentation mode. Good. Can you see my screen now, my presentation?
We actually see your notes. Oh,
Oh, so you're not seeing the screen here. Okay. So I need to actually grab over here and stop the share screen. Oh, actually sharing that screen over there. Okay. Let me share my screen again here. Just having a little bit. So is the screen that I need to share screen. So can you see my screen now?
yes, please go ahead.
Beautiful. So thank you so much again. So I have to go back. Again, I'm Dr. Vakta and I'm assistant professor at Georgia Southern University. And this is the wonderful building in which I'm talking to you from, really designed around human need. So what is my project about? What are we talking about today? Well, my project, it's called Virtual Platform. It's a project matrix. Project matrix really encompasses more than one discipline. It's a transdisciplinary project that actually use a lot of different fields or actually mix everything. Just like the picture that we see, the connectivity, those networks that make it all one project. It's really about the morphogenesis, right, of urban dynamics and human-centered design. It's deal with urban ecology, human ecology, and it's take my teaching, the professional application of research, GeoBeam, and emotion, which means that we're talking about the user actually. And then in the end, it's actually allowing us to push out students who are not out there looking for a job, but designing and creating new jobs, because we are living in an era where we have that opportunity. What does that encompass? Well, it encompasses, like I say, a lot of different fields. We have facility, online, interior design, architecture, you name it. It's because it is really kind of reflecting this globe and this world where we are all interconnected. And if we haven't realized it yet, COVID-19 has made us realize that we are all interconnected. And then the weakest link will actually be able to make all of our system fell down. So what does this do? You know, what I do is I use architecture, interior design, urban ecology, human ecology, and how do we bring all of those together? In this project, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of everything. We have a possibility today to use our handheld device to allow the user to give us real information about their day, about how they feel about the environment, and be able to push out all of that information back into the cloud so that we could use that as a set of knowledge that could allow us designers to continue designing and to make better solution. How is that possible? Well, it's possible through this education system, ideation, and experimentation to create this design that is informed platform as a service. It goes trickle all the way down into the design. I'm going to be talking mostly about the human ecology part, but in order to even talk about human, we need to talk about our environment. We find this environment here when we got here, and we need to make sure that we leave it in a better condition. If we treat the environment will treat us well. So that's really how we actually start thinking about it. We could never think about human experience building if we are not able to actually have a safe and sane environment. This video, I don't know if you could see. So this video is showing how we can do that. So over the year, we have developed this application that have allowed us to do the best building environment. But so far, we have been looking at building from the outside rather than actually from the inside. We have actually developed systems that have done things for us that we couldn't even think before. But as we're looking outside of the building, as we look outside of the city, we are forgetting really the person we're designing for, which is the human who is actually the one that gives the life to the city, the life to a building, and actually allow all of that to work. So because we live in everything is so connected, where we have all of those movements that we sometimes forget who matters. And if the environment needs to be healthy, the human around it would need to also be healthy. So in my design, what I'm presenting today, I'm going to be looking at GeoBeam. Few game project that I have done with students in the classroom, but mostly how does it matter to our human health to be able to understand the workability, the proximity, you know. Nothing around that allows us to feel good. The same thing. Think about the sea level rise. Sea level rise is a really important issue. And before we even think about designing, whether interior or exterior for human health, we need to understand what are the buildings that will be in danger. So at the bottom here, you could see those buildings that are in high danger, where the city could start understanding what area of town needs to focus on so that we don't actually put more development in those areas. How could we develop intelligently so that we are actually putting our money where the need is? So it comes from using geospatial, using GIS as a geographical information system to look at data that already exists. Now to use BEAM to actually start extruding those data, crossing them over, understanding where there are possibilities so that we could actually start finding solutions for what are the issues we have in this project. We had 4 issues that were actually more at hand that we needed to deal with, which was mobility, growth, stimulus, and resilience. So how do you deal with that? Well, you start with, the growth. If you're going to have a growth of population, it makes sense that you understand how are you going to put all of those people, who come, into the city, into one single place. So looking at the city like Savannah and realizing that Savannah spread out, Savannah has actually spread out in a way that could not be augmented. We start looking at what are the ways that we could actually start designing in an approach where buildings are actually put together and they set together, where they actually study, where they are possible to actually change and then be efficient enough so that the human experience in it's always maximized. It's not a set thing, it's something that could actually change. So those are all possible. We also look at resilience. What is resilience? This is the city of Savannah, where we're using the data from the city, where we are actually able to look at how do we create a system right at the edge of the water, where we could not only pump the water out, but also allow it when the water isn't there, to have a space where people could actually use it, an environment that actually allow people to enjoy their life, where it's not just serves one thing. But we also need to actually make sure that we understand who is that person, how they feel. Because like I said before, we have so much data that we have collected over the year, but what happened is that we don't have the actually data from the user himself with no filter, where we have the user telling us what they feel. And that's what this project or this app was developed for, because we have emotion that all come at many different times. And sometimes it's based on the space that we are in. And sometimes by the time we could actually talk about those emotions, there's a gap time that doesn't allow us to have all of the real, emotion that we have at the time. So project has actually developed this idea of the psychogeography, which allow people to use their handheld device on an app that allow you to actually use any of these. We could look at the tangible or intangible, and any user could actually develop or create their own capture. Like, for instance, could be my trip from my house to the doctor. It could be even the inside, inside building at a job like my school, where I could start collecting the data of how I feel in this building, so that data is actually collected. And as more people develop this idea, we understand how people feel in a building and how we could actually adjust that space so that people could feel better, because emotion come in many different forms and shapes. They could come all together, and sometimes we don't even know why we're getting reaction that we have. So here on this screen, you could see actually my trip in Paris, where on the line, those are tracing line, where it's tracing my path to the city with emotion, whether I'm happy, whether I'm unhappy, and whether I'm fearful, and also allow me to attach note onto those as well. So in this, I'm going to actually open this view. Can you see this? Can you see view of my trip in Paris, where over the day, every day I got out, and it's basically collecting all of my information, where it's telling me where I'm going, how fast I'm walking, and how I feel. Yeah, and also actually save a picture of that space that I have actually created. So this is allowing, this will allow us to actually understand how people are walking and feeling in an environment in a way that's really us to actually inform the design that we are working on. So these are just areas in which this work has been developing, and making sure that instead of just looking at or capturing data on the outside of people, like we have been so good at capturing them outside of the building, we actually ask people their gut feeling of how do they feel in the space, and it could be based on their personal or or on their religious, ability, or determination, or how they feel about something. But we go the little savannah here, as you can see on this map, to we have been actually walking all around the world, and you can see many places where we are actually doing those data. So it's an ability to say, now we're developing this layer of information where we are able to actually ask the people who matter the most in this design, what do you feel? How is it? Only bring what it's bring. We're creating an app that is actually able to be adjusted by user. So if somebody live at the middle of Yaoundé in Cameroon, my origin country, well, we might not have bus stop in some area in the middle of nowhere. What is it? It might be just like, the smell of the earth, in that area. It might be just going from one point to another. It could be the tree, it could be the bird sound. That app could actually go in and say, this is what mattered to me the most, and this is what I want to talk about. And then this information gets shared online, where we could all start learning about people's environment, where we could actually augment ourselves. This is really bringing up this person as celebration of our uniqueness, because everywhere we walk, we live, we have those emotions, and we leave those emotions into the space. And those are things that we cannot really actually see, but we could actually talk about them. And if we start collecting those data, we might be able to create an urban game where we could actually allow people to be able to dictate, or when many people say how they feel of an environment, we could regenerate that environment. So what you see here on the screen is a capture data using Esri tool, RGS quick capture. And in Paris, my student in Paris actually going around the city and just doing it by hand. So we could do it in both ways, where we go from developing that idea and understanding how people feel, and projecting it so that we could create a more informed design solution. And again, I've been using that app in State Borough, where my students are going all around campus and being able to actually now capture and record how they feel about the space. And usually we realize that those are things that we don't even do, but yet we live in those buildings and want to be efficient. How could we actually be more efficient? It's by telling the designer, this is how it feels. It doesn't give the result that you have said it will give. as human and saying, here I exist, here I matter, and this is what it should be, not what you have thought it was. It's really this humble way of saying, you know, as designer, we are not God. We are just people who listen to others and understand that wherever they are in the space, they have some sort of emotion and they react based on many different things, and we cannot all have the same reaction. And I think that those create this wealth of information that I call information good. It's really this wealth of information that gain value the more it's used. So as we project it out, people could actually learn from it and become better at who they are. And it's really just looking at this scanning, looking at the building as an X-ray, being able to understand and looking at us as well as an X-ray, understanding how we feel inside, what's happening, but that been possible, then being able to push it to the cloud is really just a matter of seconds today. I think that we should embrace that technology. We could make sure that we are using it and make sure that we work less. We have such a busy life, and I think that if we could use technology to make our life a lot better and a lot less work, we'll be focusing more with dealing with environment, with our family, working less, and making sure that that technology is serving human. Because I believe that if human invent technology, technology should serve humanity. One of the last slide, and this is really work that I've been working on with some colleagues across the Atlantic in France, and this work is really an ongoing work. It's transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and it's being worked on as we speak. Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure. Question, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Christina. Next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Erica Forzani. Erica Forzani is an associate professor in the Ira A. Fulton School of Engineering at Arizona State University. Arizona State, the director of ASU Mayo Clinic Medical Devices and Methods Laboratory, at ASU's Health Futures Center, and deputy director of the Centers for Bioelectronics and Biosensors. Her laboratory creates inspired, smart, and wearable health technologies comprising artificial intelligence combined with point-of-care, home use, passive, and unobstructed detection. Her lab's philosophy is first to explore the real-world needs and then proceed to invent to satisfy the need. For example, her lab has integrated passive indoor sensors for wellness and fitness, and in transmission reduction artificial intelligence systems for sensing and removing airborne particles. Please, Dr. Erica.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mohammed, for your introduction. Well, I am basically from this group, I am a hardware maker, tool maker. That's my short description, because I'm a tool maker and I am associated with an engineering school at the university that pushes to translate our technologies into real world. I have to disclose that I am co-founder of TF Health Corporation, doing business as Breezing, and also co-founder of Sequitur Health Corporation. None of the products related to these two companies will be introduced here. So this is focusing on buildings. Since we are talking about buildings, let me locate first where I'm talking from. I'm speaking from this beautiful building, which is ASU, Arizona State University, Mayo Clinic Health Alliance building. We are in the north of Phoenix. It's really a desertic area. Many times we go outside the building and we find scorpions, peccaries, snakes. So it's fun to be here in the north of Phoenix. Our building is by the Mayo Clinic Hospital in Arizona, which triggered a lot of needs presented to us from the medical doctors. And I also have a part of my laboratory in the south of Phoenix, Tempe city, in Tempe campus at the Biodesign Institute. So these two facilities are very beautiful facilities and triggering lots of good work. And, you know, the people we work with is the most important resource in addition to the beautiful infrastructure. So for the outline of my topics today is identifying the gaps in buildings in terms of sensors. This is my main expertise area. And how we could envision in the future monitoring the health and fitness of building occupants, and how we could monitor indoor air quality in times of pandemics or in times where we are worried about airborne diseases. So as I said, our environment is very interdisciplinary. We are willing to always push our technologies to real world. That's why we keep in mind the gap most of the time. So we are very aware that in the research world, if we take keywords for sensor applications, we will find over 10,000 of papers published in the last 10 years in particular topics, or very extraordinary, expensive laboratory instruments that are serving the purpose of monitoring health, environment, and safety. But if we go into the real world, we find that there are just less than a dozen technologies in these areas being in use. So definitely there is a gap between the knowledge that we create at research level versus what we deliver outside in the real world. And this gap that exists is because there are many challenges, but first ones we face are the technical challenges. So when we talk about sensing biomarkers, sensing pollutants or toxicants, we are basically trying to find and analyze molecules in a very complex environment. And pretty much the work is like searching for a needle in the haystack. So this is clearly the definition of the challenge. But we as engineers and multidisciplinary workers, we have many tools here. I don't attempt to give details. We have many tools in the chemistry, in the mechanical, in the electrical engineering, computer science background, where we can put all together, and working together, we can bridge this gap. So more specifically, here are a couple of examples from our lab where we design wearables that can detect traffic pollutants. So this is a wearable connected to a cell phone app that can detect exposure to traffic pollutants such as benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene in real time. And here is another wearable detects basically our metabolic rate, the number of calories that we are burning just at resting state per day. So all these two examples have been able to be accomplished because we use an approach that is hybrid and integrated, where we condition our samples, we select specific sensors to work with detection circuits, we do signal processing, and then we work on user interfaces to make these results meaningful to the user. And here is where all the bunch of different areas of engineering comes. This is an example from our previous work with the wearable, and here is an example of a day that we tested hydrocarbons within the campus. And we can see that this person was exposed to low and high levels depending on location in the campus. But for that specific day, the AirNow.gov was providing basically this map and giving us a yellow level, moderate pollution for that specific day. But the individual was mostly at a good level, good environment, clean environment, and extraordinary moments exposed. So the need of personal and local monitoring stations, is necessary, obviously, and this triggers to think beyond what else we can do, because this one is all outside. We monitor the regions, we can create beautiful maps, we can have wearables and specifically detect what is happening with that specific individual, right? But if we think about buildings, right, what is going on inside buildings bring us to the concept of passive sensors. So there are wearable sensors that are serving the purpose and very well documented important information comes from these wearable sensors. But I believe as a tool maker that there are passive sensors that are already developed and that we could tap in to accommodate in particular form factors that could bring us additional information regardless the carbon dioxide, relative humidity, temperature, particulates, VOCs, information that we can currently gather. So, okay, the question is how we can monitor health and fitness of building occupants using these state-of-the-art sensors. If we talk about health and fitness, one of the first thing that may come to our mind is, and as an end consumer, the need of our weight management, right? We may be overweight, we may need to lose some weight, right? And we typically have diets, activity, weights as elements in mind that we could tap into to manage our weight. But the true statement is that there is a component that is missing, and the missing component is the metabolism. And this is exactly what we described before, the resting metabolic rate, or also known as a resting energy expenditure. And how we could monitor this parameter passively by using existing sensors without even bothering to put something on our face and measure it. So we thought about this problem, and we created this system named SmartPath. The SmartPath is a system that has sensors embedded in a chair. The sensors are carbon dioxide, humidity, temperature, barometric sensors, sensors for occupancy to detect when the person is sitting in the chair. And this sensing module connects via Bluetooth with an app that runs an intelligent algorithm that allows to control the indoor air quality and actuates the ventilation of the environment where we are, such as, for example, an office, right? So the futuristic idea behind this system was the monitor metabolic rate of metabolism over time as the person comes into the office to work, and looking at the fluctuations so that we can help that individual to identify important factors for their management. So here is a screenshot of the app of this system. The system allows to control the carbon dioxide levels. We monitor carbon dioxide levels so the person stays in a healthy environment. But we look at further into the profiles generated, and we develop models that allowed us to extract the metabolism of that individual in the office. So here is one of our first studies. We performed at an office in Phoenix, Arizona. You can see here a desk with a SmartPath, the ventilation actuator installed, and we tested the system with gold standard methods, and we could prove that the correlation was 1-to-1. So when the conditions are well established, we were able to get this metabolic rate very accurately. We also move forward and we put a smart camera and monitor the activity of individuals, and we could extract the power of the movement by simply following the smart camera movement of the individual, and that combined with a smart path, we demonstrated the feasibility for assessment of physical fitness. We further went over the car and installed the system in the car, and we are currently working with this system to determine the metabolic rate of drivers in addition with other drivers parameters in connection with cognitive functions of the driver. So this is one example for health and fitness integration. And now I move on into monitoring indoor air, more specifically the monitoring of aerosols that are so important, as we know, because aerosols can transmit virus, as we learned from the pandemic. So we modified the previous system and created what we call transmission reduction artificial intelligence system, TRACE as for short name, and we incorporated particle counters that were very sensitive to aerosol particles higher than 0.3 micrometers. So we added this to our app, and you can see here on the right screenshot of monitoring with 3 different particles counters in addition to carbon dioxide, humidity, and all the other environmental parameters. And we set settings for triggering alarms and ventilation actuation when the levels of aerosols were higher than the normal baseline levels for the system. So the system works. We further and decide additional remediations that we could consider when we detect spikes of aerosols, and created additional components. And we tested the system initially in 2 main places, public restrooms and hospitals. So here is an example of the setting of our system. It was there monitoring for hours at different levels in a public restroom, the door, made urinal, and then a toilet. And we could extract information pretty valuable. Basically, what we define is that the baseline was for this specific place was never higher than level, except for occasions where there was, for example, flushing in the toilet, but the flushing was caused, the increase was caused due to fecal matter flushing instead of urine. So in this condition, the system actuates further ventilation, and you can see immediate decrease of the particles as a way to remediate the exposure. We further went to the hospital and used the system to monitor what would be happening during nebulization of compromised patients, CT scans, and ambulances. And we concluded that the levels of aerosols can be very important, and that's why we created aerosol barriers like the one mentioned here. This is just one example, but basically we implemented these type of barriers to control the proliferation of aerosols in patients that have had COVID, and they are currently in use at Mayo Clinic Enterprise. So, but here you can see an example on how nebulization can cause increase of particles, and then how appropriate ventilation can decrease them. And how mitigating with aerosol barrier mask can keep, these particles basically at low levels all the time. So we further tested the system, and we decided to develop a sampler when the levels to sample aerosol particles when levels higher than the thresholds baselines were detected. And we could, we could do it feasibly. So this was in an effort to develop a sensor that can detect the nature of those particles, whether they are from a virus or not. So we think that this kind of systems could be implemented in this fashion in a wireless network eventually. And this is, effort that is accounted for the future. But from a toolmaker's perspective, we could confidently say that with these sensing systems that can be controlled very smartly, we could monitor the health and fitness of building occupants, and we could also reduce the risk of airborne disease by locating appropriately tools. So this is basically my presentation. This is the group of great people that I work with. I have, excellent collaborators in the medical field, in the engineering field, quality management, systems, and doctors, and indoor air quality experts also involved. So it takes a village to accomplish some of this work, and we are very grateful with our funding organizations. And thank you for your attention. Here is my email and my webpage in case you are interested to see other type of works that we do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my panelists for such intriguing presentations. Let me check the questions. We have, I think, about 6 minutes. So please make sure you put your questions in the chat if there are any more. Let's say we have a couple of questions. Let's start with Dr. Christine. So one question is, how can the marriage of BIM and geospatial data help building managers?
So the question is, how can
the marriage of BIM and geospatial data help building managers?
I think that is really a key. I think that today there's GeoBIM. It's, if you think about designing a BIM, it's located somewhere. So if you put the geo on it, it's mean that you are bringing location intelligence, and they're all there. So I think that building manager actually must BIM, because you cannot actually start designing if you don't understand if the soil is suitable, if you don't understand how people have lived in that area. So the data that is already actually collected by cities and census data allow you to actually bring all of those. In fact, when I started GeoBIM, I thought it was really hard. One of the things that is great for geospatial and BIM is that they actually merge individually and naturally. My students were able to merge that in 2017 before GeoBIM naturally, because it's just there waiting for that. It's allow you to have the social, you to have all of the different data, natural data, green infrastructure, and even understand how the environment, or if the environment needs that type of design, or how do you tweak it so that it's better for the use of the space. So yeah, it's a healthy, and I think a therapeutic, add on to building manager.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. I think we have one for Dr. Eric. So Meng is asking about if the work you have presented has been published, and I think your link would lead to some of that, right? Correct?
Yes. So I'm popping here in the chat one of the links for the publication that may take to additional references from us. And yeah, I can copy a couple of more. So Dr. May.
So maybe that's a good segue to one of the other questions. What are the challenges to put in practice the discussed systems?
Yes, so that's a great question. The challenges, I think we demonstrated with our work that we can overcome technical challenges. I think the next challenge would be more on the regulatory channel, right? How we work with ASHRAE, for example, to implement this type of systems. The system could be easily implemented in existing infrastructure. As I mentioned, you know, many of the sensors are off-shell component. It will be an adaptation of how we control ventilation with algorithms. So I don't consider that a tremendous challenge, but in terms of regulatory, we should make sure that the specs of the system pass ASHRAE regulations, and probably with so many other associations, there are many other things that may be triggered. So the systems can be certified and pass certification, right? And the other point will be from FDA regulatory standing point. I think an important aspect will be to make sure how the traffic of the data is conducted and how the encryption of the data is implemented, so that we can be HIPAA compliant, right? And be able to redirect all this information, if it's biometrics, right, to the medical doctors and relevant professionals, right, that can help the individuals living inside the buildings. So yeah, that's my thinking from my understanding.
Thank you. So we had another question. What are the envisioned scenarios of use? I think you covered it a little bit in your answer so far. Do you want to add something to that?
Sorry, can you repeat?
The envisioned scenarios of use.
Oh, the ambitious scenarios. Well, we spoke about offices. I think offices are a great environment for gathering biometrics. We spend lots of our daily hours, right, working. Then I would say the car environment becomes another important environment that we may be able to tap into. And for systems more like the trace system, I think the applications definitely will be in public spaces and hospitals. That's my vision.
Thank you. Looks like we're almost done. So I would like to thank my panelist, or our panelist. And I'd like to thank Susan also for setting up and helping us. Unfortunately, she was not able to join us today. Actually, I see her. Maybe she had to join. Thank you all. I give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Appreciate your running a tight session here, and thanking all the speakers for some very, very thoughtful information and food for thought here. So we will take a 5-minute wellness break from 1:35 to 1:40, when we will reconvene for the 6th and the final track in this forum. It's called Emerging Change Strategies. So 5 minutes is what we have right now. See you soon. Okay, it is 1:40 and we are back for this final track of the forum. I do want to take a moment and thank everybody for being here, for participating, for joining and engaging with us at this important event. So this track is called Emerging Change Strategies, and our moderator here is Barbara Hewlett. I would like to say something about Barbara Hewlett. If you would give me a moment, please. Or I could ask that Barbara be able to say something about herself. I think that will be better.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to hand this right over to you. You've got until 2:40, and I think everybody knows the drill of sending their questions to the chat box. So the floor is yours, Barbara.
Okay, thank you, Kumkum. And I share my screen here. Thank you for joining us in this last session for the afternoon and for this two-day wonderful forum that we're all very excited about. I'm Barbara Hewlett, the monitor for this session, and I come from a healthcare design background. I design healthcare facilities, hospitals, cancer centers, clinics, and all kinds of medical facilities. I've always been very excited about the idea of linking the environment to health, and have been with HiBR for many years, back with Charles when we founded this group. And so I'm very, very excited to share this really exciting group of panelists today to talk about the emerging change strategies. Let me get the slideshow here. There we go. So we have a great group of panelists that will each present this final session. And what we're going to be talking about is the change strategies. And as we've gone through the last couple of days, we've heard all these exciting presentations about possibilities of what we can do. And we know it's so important. We spend so much of our time in the indoor environment. And this pandemic that we're just emerging from has really been a driver for change. Many of you have talked about this in your presentations over the last couple of days, but we know that what it has done to our society and our culture, it's closed down our world as we knew it. It canceled our milestones in life. And we've learned a lot, and certainly this is coming to the forefront today. We've learned that we want to be outdoors because it seems to be the only place, the only healthy place, and yet we thrive on our social interactions. So when we talk about our healthy buildings and the complexity of this and the technology, which we've heard some very exciting presentations on, the politics, the finance, and all of the gaps that we're seeing, what can we do? So we're going to start with first with Dr. Cross and Dr. Kong and Mr. Dinning, and we're going to hear what they have to share. Linda, our first speaker up, is a professor of psychology at Howard University and is board certified in clinical psychology. And her background is really in sleep medicine, and her focus today is going to be about the relationship of sleep and people, the human dynamics of it. So Linda, please, the floor is yours, and I will give you the screen and take it away.
Linda, please unmute yourself.
Hold on, I have to get up the. All right, now let's see if I can get. Hold on. All right, 1 second. There we go. I'll share screen. And now we should be able to do it. No. Basic. Here we go. And let me get this big. Whoop, whoop. 1 second.
You might want to click on presenter view.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. There we go. Okay. Actually, all right, that's okay. You'll see my notes. We'll just go that way. Hello. It's a pleasure to be here today and to speak about how the built environment moderates the relationship between sleep and nature's Zeitgebers. This is a strange word in this title, so I just want to explain it. Zeitgeber is a German word, and Zeit means time, and Geber means give. So these are really the time givers of nature. And they act as the stop button for our everyday circadian rhythms that keep our appetite, sleep, and bodily organs doing their job every day in the same way. And while what is good for your sleep is almost always good for your daytime health, that is not always the case. And so I want you to keep in mind that complexities and paradoxes exist. And occasionally, a design feature that helps sleep can potentially pose challenges to optimum daytime functioning. But let us go on to sleep. Okay? We all know that after a good night's sleep, we're happier. We're better able to perform efficiently, think more clearly, and act less impulsively. We do feel healthier. But on the public health side, the effects of poor sleep are not as apparent to many of us. But consider these statistics. Sleep deprivation increases the risk of diabetes 3 times and makes you even 3 times more likely to catch a cold. It increases your risk of dementia by 33%. There's a 48% increase in your risk of heart disease and a 36% increase in your risk of colorectal cancer. Sleep deprivation can actually age the brain 3 to 5 years. We know there are over 6,000 fatal car crashes every year caused by drowsy drivers, and that's fatal, meaning they lead to a death. If you get less than 5 hours sleep a night, you have a 50% greater chance of being obese. That's because in sleep deprivation, our appetite hormones are increased and our satiety hormones are decreased. And obviously, the hungrier we feel and the less able we are to know when we are full, the more likely we are to overeat. So sleep deprivation, I think we'll all agree, is a major public health problem. But why discuss sleep deprivation in this forum? Well, sleep is controlled by the forces of nature: sound, light, temperature, air quality, and comfort are forces that could all be enhanced or diminished or even destroyed by the built environment. And today, I'd like to take a few minutes, sort of as a consciousness raising, to review how the built environment interfaces with these Zeitgebers, these time givers, that our body needs to differentiate when to be awake and when to be asleep. So we're going to start off with noise, because society has paid the greatest economic cost and seems at a policy level to make to be willing to put the most money into noise abatement and to make sure that noise is minimized at night because it is so destructive to sleep. Airports are restricted all over the world at an enormous economic cost to avoid nighttime flights. Amsterdam Schiphol Airport, which most of you have probably landed in, is unusually busy because it has those late night flights coming in, very early flights, and because it's a major European transfer station. But it gets a minimum of 68,000 noise complaints a year. But not only airports are economically affected. Bars and music venues are regulated also and not allowed to be rowdy all night. Apartments all have lengthy procedures for dealing with noise complaints from other tenants. Indeed, it seems to me, and I may be wrong, that a big differentiator in the cost of condos seems to be how soundproof the units are from one another and from the outdoors. Unfortunately, and this is the ceiling of my sister's condo building, some buildings are so equipment heavy on the roof that penthouse apartments like my sister's have dwellers who can't sleep because of faulty or loose or just loud roof mechanicals. But of course, not all sound is equal. We sleep much better with continuous sound than with intermittent sound. We sleep much better when the sounds are familiar than when they're strange. Just ask any city person who goes and takes a camping trip and can't sleep because of the sounds of the forest, the hoot of an owl, or even the croak of a frog. The next, and I think scientifically the most understood zeitgeber, is light. After our eyes stop receiving blue light, and that happens when it gets dark outside, we start producing melatonin the minute the blue light goes away. And 2 hours later, most of us get tired and hopefully go to sleep. When you don't get evening darkness, sleep problems abound. There's only so much people can adapt to. In Iceland, where the sun doesn't set a lot of months, people wear sunglasses when outdoors by late afternoon, even when the sun is not out. They routinely have sleep masks, and all windows have light shielding blinds. But what is not so much popularized in the press, but is well known by scientists, is that while evening darkness is critical, it must be matched with morning light. It's the 30 minutes of early morning light that really sets our clock on the wake routine so that we do get tired and are able to process that melatonin 16 hours later. For buildings, this means that the ideal building for sleep exists on a north-south axis so that the front rooms face east and get the morning sun. One of the best examples of architects building for sleep and health are Le Corbusier's Habitat Unité buildings, and I believe these are World Heritage sites, but they're developments that are peppered throughout Europe. The one in this picture, I believe, is from Berlin. And these apartments, they have many, many cool features, but they were designed so that each apartment gets the same amount of light each day. And actually, many of the units go across the whole building and you can get the westerly sunset. But technology has, and many of the talks I've heard in the past 2 days have shown all the wonderful things technology is doing, but technology is helping all of us potentially in the future get more morning lights. There are loads of new apps that city planners are using to revamp neighborhoods so that more morning light is available. For example, There are varieties of apps available that let you know how much light you can get in any possible house design in a particular location. In New York City, there's an app that lets you know the shadows that exist at every hour for every apartment in the city. It also shows you the 10 apartments that get the most light in each borough and the 10 that get the least light. To make sure that folks have access to light, there are actually shadow laws that exist in almost every state. For example, in the District of Columbia, there is a shadow law that you cannot build anything that shadows your neighbor's solar panels. In many cities, buildings cannot create shadows in the adjoining parks. Think of the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building tapered so that some of the light can filter down to the sidewalk. And in today's world, the apps are needed because we understand how complex and interacting things can be. Think of New York City. Because of its latitude, New York City doesn't really have the sun rise exactly in the east and set exactly in the west. Indeed, in the summer in Manhattan, the sun rises in the northeast and sets in the northwest. But in the winter, the angle changes and the sun rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest. In the spring and fall, the grid is off about 30 degrees from true north, so that the street intersections tend to be very bright, much brighter than the streets because the sun is going diagonally across them at lunchtime. And as somebody, I went to graduate school in Columbia, and I think I actually, in my mind, or maybe this is a created memory, had noticed that. But this is why today, being a shadow consultant is a field. It is a field of expertise. Now, many of the panelists here today that I heard spoke about air quality, but air quality also affects sleep. We know that pollution increases the risk of asthma and that sleep apnea increases with the particulate matter in the air. There are some other stunning research findings, though. An interesting study from China looking at university freshmen in Beijing found a 1 standard deviation in decrease in air quality index was associated with a daily sleep reduction of 42 minutes. And that is enormous in the world of sleep deprivation. A small increase in particulate matter can increase our risk of sleep apnea by 60%. Of course, COVID has helped us all appreciate the value of filtering air in the built environment. It is best in the sleep world, we say, to open the window and get fresh air. But if the environmental air quality is not optimum, you may be better off with a good indoor filtration system. Air quality, or air, is one of the zeitgebers that really is highly variable and needs to be monitored on a daily basis, because we know there are so many factors that influence air quality. On some days, you're probably better off opening the window at night, and on other days, you're probably better keeping that window closed. Now, besides air quality, the odor of the air has become trendy. And air aroma is used to lull us to sleep with lavender candles or mint deodorizers. Many condos and hotels have started proprietary odors as part of their branding. For instance, those of us who have been in a Bozzuto building know that they all smell the same. I do not know of any research that is looking to see if people sleep better in these homogenized, odorized buildings or not, but it would be interesting. I know that some people are sensitive to them and do not like it, but for those who do, it may in fact increase sleep quality. Comfort also lulls us to sleep. Consider the world of cultural modifications that make us comfortable. In this picture over here, this is a country in, I forget which country in Africa, but they use sedge grass. And the cool thing about these mattresses they make is not only does it have a very soothing smell, but it repels mosquitoes.
Whoa.
Up here, we see the Noom, which is part of the craze where robotics are helping babies sleep without parental assistance. Over here, we have a very ingenious set of parents who had twins and were finding an easy way to co-sleep. Right? And here is the Chinese Kang, and just to show the range of cultural traditions of creating comfort. With the Kang bed, it has flues underneath its flat surface, which conduct air from the fireplace into the room. But in the meantime, it heats the bed on the way. I've never slept in one, but I'd like to. The last HiBR I want to mention is temperature. And here it's important to note that our animal nature is most obvious. At night, we like to hibernate. Sleep is associated with the lowest body temperatures of the day. The ideal room temperature should be around 60 to 67 degrees, cool enough to help lower our body temperature by the 1 or 2 degrees that most of us get lowered every night. But of course, what everybody always asks, if that's the ideal temperature, what are blankets all about? Well, when we're sleeping, we lose some of our ability to be a warm-blooded animal. We can't regulate our body temperature, and it keeps falling till about 3 a.m. So blankets help. Blankets are used almost all over the world, not everywhere, but they are used in very hot areas. And when they're not used, folks huddle together and sleep to get warmth very often. And if we need to adjust the night, if we need to get a temperature adjustment during the night, nature gives us the 1 foot outside the blanket to help cool us down. Not only are our feet hairless, which lets the heat dissipate quicker, but the veins and arteries in the foot that expand in the heat give wake-up signals to the brain. While those arteries and veins, when they're relaxed, they give sleep signals to the brain. Now, since this is a wide-ranging conversation, I wanted to end sharing one of the newest inventions in the sleep world, the Ford Motor Mattress. Using technology that keeps cars in their lane, this mattress will redistribute itself if your bed partner is shifting into your lane, so that the two of you will not crash. Now, some may find this mattress essential, but bodies falling into one another at night is most often not a bad thing, and often very natural. I hope the design world will look to psychologists more and let us be part of the internet disciplinary team to help them figure out what modifications will be helpful and which will not. Thank you, and I hope we have a time for questions.
Thank you so much, Linda. That was very inspiring and learned a lot of new things. Please put your questions in the chat box so after our presentations, we can move forward and answer some of those questions. Okay, our next speaker up is Dr. Kong, who has more than 10 years of research and experience in building environments and energy systems. He's earned his Ph.D. in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Syracuse University and is now working at the Well Living Lab as one of the building scientists. His work has focused on the human and building intersection. Along the lines of that, he does research to help understand how building occupants and the physiological, the psychological change due to the indoor environment and how design and the operations of the buildings can create a healthier indoor environment. So Dr. Kong, please, the floor is yours and we're looking forward to hearing you. Let's see, and share your screen.
Sure, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Okay. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And hi, everybody. Thanks for the introduction from Barbara. Like Barbara just introduced, my name is Kumkum. I'm one of the building research scientists working for Well Living Lab. I was actually brought to this group in 2000 and 2018 by the HiBR Scholar Program. Although I have been with the group for 4 years, I still feel very warm, like the first day I participated in the HiBR forum and receive a lot of help from people within the group. Here, I just want to give my special thanks to Michelle and Linda for doing such an amazing job to bring HiBR to the current level. And I really appreciate your leadership, and I won't be here to enjoy the forum without you. Thank you a lot. And coming back to our presentation, as Barb just introduced, my background is in building science and engineering. I have been working in this area since college. When I was preparing for my talk a few weeks ago, a sentence that my professor of building HVAC system in college said, just come back to me again. He said, we can and should make the building more responsible for people to live in it. And boom, right away, I decided I'm going to use this as the title of my presentation. So first of all, why buildings should be responsible? I think the reason is very obvious. Since created, building has been playing a role of providing shelter for protecting humans against the uncontrollable climate and nature. Building environment has been defined as the environment in the buildings where people can live, work, and do other activities. With the development of building technology, a lot of more capabilities has been added to the building, and that makes the building environment evolve from a very simple enclosed space to a synthesis of a wide range of controllable factors, including air quality, thermal condition, acoustic quality, lighting condition, view quality, etc. This expansion of the building capacities did not just make the building more functional in human life, but also dramatically increase people's time spent in the building. According to a very latest report, on average, people spend more than 80% time in the indoor space, which indicates compared to other space, people's performance, perception, behavior, and health response is more impacted by the environment in the buildings. Then what is the responsibility of the buildings usually have? Typically, when we are evaluating the buildings, we look at from 3 different perspectives, which include, first of all, safety and resilience. Second, environmental and energy cost. And the last, human performance and well-being. As probably everybody knows, that safety and resilience is a basic responsibility for building. They protect us and our possess from extreme weather and climate, wildlife, nature, or artificial hazards, and help us recover faster afterwards. The energy and the environment costs are the responsibilities were added most recently, since building has become a major factor of energy use all over the world, which account for about 40% total energy use and greenhouse emission. There's a big potential to reduce the energy costs and environmental impact by the building. Last but not the least, human performance and well-being is somehow the responsibility most easily to be ignored by people. Most of the current building code only consider minimal requirement, but fail to account for better human health, performance, and well-being. The same as buildings, these 3 responsibilities evolve all the time, which is not only driven by the current human needs, but also reflects people's future concerns. Especially after the COVID came, they have been somewhat redefined. In the next few slides, I would like to use some of that work my colleague or myself did in the past few years to substantiate these responsibilities, and also hope to provide some insight into what building research need to be like a target after the COVID. So talking about the responsibility of the buildings in the last 2 years, air quality is probably is the one that nobody could ignore. Like what other researchers just introduced after COVID comes, not many people are before the COVID come, actually, not many people really care about the air quality. I remember one of my colleagues told me a funny story a few years ago, which kind of sounds very sarcastic to me now. At that time, he went to Home Depot to buy a filter for his experiment. So when he asked the service guy, okay, where he could find the filter, the guy like guided him to the aisle and told him he was the only one in the last half year who came for the filter. I hate to say this, but it's very true that the COVID made the air quality outstanding and remind us of validating or re-examining the performance of many existing strategies and technologies that can help alleviate the pandemic again. We have never seen people like talking about air quality that much. The simplest question people asking every day now is like how much air we actually need and how clean the air should be. Does the air purifier work, or are there any like other methods that are more efficient in maintaining the good air quality? So to answer these questions, we have done a series of studies in which we build a breathing simulator, which can generate fluorescent tagged particles following a realistic breathing pattern to represent virus-laden aerosol generated by COVID infectors. These particles are distributed in different types of spaces, such as like an office, classroom, conference room, under mechanical ventilation with or without air purifiers. Like simply speaking, methods as easy as like replacing the filter with a higher grade one or placing portable air purifiers in crowded rooms are indeed effective in reducing the infection risk. Most of our current buildings actually have these capabilities to take this responsibility, but unfortunately, we did not do much before. These findings, together with a lot of other studies, also challenge the current building code and regulation, so that the discussion of reassessing the validity of this code permeates the community. Well, although even these methods are proved to be effective within the capacity of current system, most of them can only reduce the infection risk by around like 30%. And not any of them, except the mask probably, could effectively protect people within the 2 meters of the infector, which more or less makes them less reliable when social distance cannot be maintained. For example, restaurants, conference rooms, or theaters. A relatively new technology is therefore brought back to the table, which is called personalized ventilation system. When I say personalized ventilation, you probably do not know what it is, but I believe most of you have used it before. When you travel by plane, there's a small, always a small diffuser above you that provide clean air to your breathing zone. This is type of personalized ventilation. And compared with the background ventilation system, this type of system could provide maximum protection by either supplying clean air to the people before it's contaminated by surrounding air, or removing or purifying the pollutant directly from the source before it spreads to the ambience. So our recent finding proved that when appropriately designed, the personal ventilation could provide over 75% protection, which even surpass most of the masks on the market. And even within the social distance, is the protection it provides can reach above like 65% also. And talking about the personal ventilation system, it is also one of the subcategories of so-called personal or microenvironment control system. This type of system does not only help guarantee people's safety in the buildings, but also contributes to the reduction of energy and environment costs of the building. On par with the definition of personal ventilation system, the personal or microenvironment control system is a type of system that provides local environmental control to the occupants. This environment control can be air quality control, thermal condition control, lighting control, etc. Back to more than like 15 years ago, researchers have raised the question, okay, if we can provide local environment control to each individual with comparatively less energy, can we save more energy by like losing the background control? As you probably have known, the answer is yes. A study done by a group in UC Berkeley have proved that technically, if we can provide like use like around 50 to 60 watts energy to provide local condition, we can potentially loosen the background temperature control by 4 Fahrenheit degree on both sides and save up to like 30% HVAC energy while providing the same or even better level of comfort. And this slide summarizes a study I did when I was at Syracuse University. This is actually my last presentation in 2018 at HiBR Forum. It is a microenvironment control system study sponsored by US Department of Energy, initiated from the chart I just shared. So because of the time constraint, I cannot go too detailed, but this system can basically provide like local cooling to the occupants during summer, utilizing a small scale like vapor compression system and phase change material, and provide local heating to the occupants during the winter by a radiant foot warmer. This device uses less than like 60 watts energy, but can achieve the same level of comfort as the original environment when the background temperature is loosened from between 70 and 75 Fahrenheit degree to 60, between 66 and 79 Fahrenheit degree. So except the microenvironment control system, another new strategy that can contribute to the building's responsibility of energy and environmental costs is what's being called occupancy-based or occupancy like a centric control. Simply speaking, it is a type of algorithm that controls the lighting, temperature, or ventilation rate based on occupancy, presence, or numbers detected in the building space. For example, you must have seen this before. When you enter a room, the light was turned on automatically, and when you exit the room, the light was turned off after a while. Usually, there is like a presence sensor or occupancy sensor installed in the room, which triggers the light on or off when it detects people's presence or absence in the room. What's more interesting is that there are some other sensors that can tell the system how many people exactly in the room and adjust the control of the building system accordingly. For example, the ASHRAE standard requires the ventilation system to provide 5 CFM fresh air per person to the space, to the office space usually. So when we design the system for office space, we usually use what we call design occupancy. Let's say the office can take up to 15 workers. We use this number 15 to calculate how much fresh air needed to be provided to the room and consistently provide this much air to the space during office hour, no matter whether people are actually in the office or not. However, that always makes the room over-ventilated because people may not stay in the office all the time, especially after COVID came. A lot more companies allow hybrid working, which means fewer people come to the office. This type of occupancy sensor can tell HVAC system what exactly number of people in the space and adjust the ventilation rate accordingly. In this way, we can save quite a lot of energy for conditioning the outdoor air, especially in the region with extreme weather condition like where I'm living in Minnesota.
You have 1 more minute.
Okay, I will wrap up very quickly. So 5 years ago, we did a study sponsored by U.S. Department of Energy, to evaluate the performance of occupancy sensor and integration of the occupancy-based control in the building system. So simply speaking, the system could reduce the HVAC energy by up to 35%, depending on how accurate the system is working and also the weather condition. And also we looked into the comfort level under the occupancy-based control, but didn't find any significant reduction in the comfort. Well, aside from the first 2 responsibilities, like human performance and well-being, are probably the one, like I just mentioned, easily to be ignored by people. And simply speaking, more fundamental work is needed to address that. Human performance and well-being is because it's a very complex concept and include but not limited to productivity, cognitive performance, sleep and stress, and there are quite a lot of building environment factors involved. And also for different type of building, the definition of the performance and well-being might be different. And this is a study we did a few years ago, led by my colleague, which looked into the biophilia effect on human performance and well-being. And also we are doing a study looking into the indoor air quality on office workers' performance and well-being. And we just finished the literature review, and based on our study, our review, air pollutant, including CO2, PM, volatile organic compounds, and microbiomes, all impact people's performance and health outcome. And well, I'm going to conclude my talk today. So as we all know, COVID has changed our life dramatically. So just like today, we're meeting virtually. And as far as I know, a lot of companies are moving hybrid. And maybe in the future, we'll have more people will spend more time in their home. And from the data, we have seen the occupancy rate of most commercial buildings drop a lot, which means a space may be less occupied in the future, and air quality and have become the more important than ever, and more stress have been reported for both working and living after COVID. All these changes are pulling for technologies and research to strengthen the responsibility of buildings. For example, use of occupancy control or microenvironment control, like I just mentioned, and also the redefinition of how high performance buildings and corresponding code, the update of corresponding code or regulations in the next few years to address those concerns.
Thank you so
And
much. Thank you so much for your very informative presentation. We have our time, our clock is marching forward. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Please put your questions for Dr. Kwong in the chat box, and we can get to them after our final presenter, Jack Denning. And Jack is a project manager and material specialist at Brightworks Sustainability. His background is in architecture and material sustainability. His work is focused on developing reliable strategies that are aligned with industry leaders in material health efforts and empower designers to take that initiative in their practice. Jack has been deeply involved in material health education, both in the higher ed and among practitioners, and working at Harvard University's Office of Sustainability. Please, I'm so happy to present Jack. And Jack, please, we look forward to seeing your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. And so great to hear all the research. Today's been fascinating, and a big thank you to everyone at HiBR too, who's been involved in organizing this. So like Barbara mentioned, I'll be talking about the Common Materials Framework today, which is an initiative organized by Mindful Materials. So really focusing on the material side of impacts. And next, yeah. So really coming at it from, I mean, I started from the design perspective, but I think everyone in the built environment is now trying to focus on choosing materials that are going to have positive impacts. And when I say positive, thinking holistically about this. So from addressing chemicals of concern, embodied carbon, non-renewable resources, forced labor, like all of these are critically important things that we can't be ignoring. But for designers or specifiers, it's not an easy decision. There's just dozens of different standards, certifications, things that you'd have to understand the labels to make the decision between things. And at the end of the day, most of these people they're designers. They're not experts in understanding labels. So to really understand the scope of this complexity, recent studies show there were 600 what they call green product certifications out on the market. Some of these are great, trustworthy, really reliable, multi-attribute standards. Others are basically greenwashing. And again, not every designer can or really should have the expertise to know about all of these standards in that depth. We also have not only just different standards, but then different owners or organizations are setting their own metrics and all trying to make positive impacts to avoid things like chemicals of concern. But if one owner is saying, these are the ones on our list, and another has a different list, then it's just sending different signals to the marketplace about what we're trying to avoid. So this is basically a diagram of the state of the market now. So if every organization has different standards and they're having to reach out to every manufacturer individually and communicate it, then it's sort of just this mess of everyone having to do all of this work without a clear signal to it. Not to mention just what this takes from a resource data management perspective of if everyone's doing it differently, they need to manage it all themselves. So doing this for all types of building materials, for all types of impacts, just sort of becomes insurmountable. And it's also something that most firms or organizations don't have the resources to take on that scope. So there's not really a easy path for adoption, or at least a clear path for adoption. So at the same time, back to that first point of people are wanting to make more positive impacts. We're seeing much more action in this, or interest in taking action in this area. In the last year, we've had, or maybe it's more than a year now, but AIA, ASID, IIDA, they're all the major industry organizations have material pledges now. We have tens of thousands of designers who are committed to taking action. But more action, just period, without alignment of what that is, just yields more confusion and potential fragmentation of the work that has been done or that is being done. So this is where Mindful Materials has really stepped in and said, we need to convene basically everybody who's in this space so that we can start to kind of align actions. So because if we can align them in the same direction, that's how we really get momentum and keep scaling this work. So that's pretty much been the story for the last year and a half. They've been organizing working groups that are really dissecting all these different standards and certifications and mapping them out. So involving the A&D, the architects, designers, the manufacturers, the owners, ecosystem partners who are managing the certifications and platforms, and really just kind of like mapping a full lay of the land. So it starts with this high level organization of like 5 buckets, we'll say, of impacts, just general groupings. And these were defined first by AAA pledge, that knowing that how influential that is going to be, that seems like a valuable holistic framework to build off. And then recognizing that we need to go or further define these buckets because there's really different impacts. Like if we're looking at circularity, for instance, if you're like the sourcing of regenerative inputs is very different than having end of life responsibility. And both of them are critical to actually having a circular economy. So we need to be able to separate the different sub buckets or sub impacts within these different areas. And then from there, the first step was really saying like, well, then what are the existing industry certifications that are most relevant to any one of these buckets and impacts? So over on the right here, we're just starting to identify those that are going to be most relevant. And from there saying, okay, well, if they're both relevant, then what are they saying the same thing, or is this different? So going deep into the granular, like the credits that each certification uses, and this example is for the biodiversity and conservation bucket, but to say, like, for instance, this one certification is defining it by land use and biodiversity, whereas another might be looking at endangered species in that area. So really teasing out all the different factors that certifications are addressing, where they're addressing it in the same way and where they're using different metrics for it. So this has led to really the formation of, we'll say, version 1.0 of the Common Materials Framework. So we got a high level look here of those defined impact categories on the left side and all the standards and certifications on the right. So just a quick diving in. So if we go in health, for example, and then looking at the substances sub bucket, then the different type of major disclosures and certifications from health product declarations to declare labels, cradle to cradle, and then further breaking it down to know that, again, these mean different things, they do different things. So some of them are really looking at transparency or product ingredient disclosure. We're kind of just saying, giving information about the product. Others then use that information, like the ingredients list, and assess them or screen them against restricted substances lists, chemicals of concern, and start to say whether or not those ingredients are bad or issues. So then the next step of, okay, if they are bad or if there are issues, is a manufacturer making commitments to improve those products? And finally, optimization. Are they actually making better products? Is a product optimized? So this transparency, assessment, commitments, optimization structure, or has now become known as TACO, is the breakdown for all of the 18 sub buckets here. So we have that kind of consistent pathway for being able to track improved products. And again, any one of even within transparency, there's very different levels of quality. Sometimes you have 100% of the ingredients disclosed. Sometimes it's 95 or less. Sometimes it's third-party verified and you can trust it. Other times it's just self-disclosed and you're not really sure if it's reliable. So we're having to tease out what these distinctions are among all the certifications. So we can say, like, well, which chemicals of concern are addressed by which certifications, sometimes at different levels. Sometimes it's gold or platinum that it's at. Sometimes it's anything from a certification. And doing the same thing across all 5 buckets. So things like recycled content that we've been talking about forever, differentiating between pre-consumer, post-consumer, how that relates to reintegrated content, and again, the different certifications that are used for them. And then finally, I wanted to highlight the social health and equity bucket, which is really one that is such I think, an emerging issue, or it's been a historic issue, but it's finally getting the attention that it needs with the amount of forced labor that there is in product supply lines. So we're looking at probably 3 to 4 dozen certifications that have some verification of supplier human rights policies in that program. And while we're looking at all these certifications, to the designer, they just need to really care about, like, they're just looking at the impacts, and you can search and filter by these issues. And if a product has any of these certifications, then it comes up. So basically it's a fundamental reframing where instead of needing to memorize all these different standards, it's putting the impacts first. So it's the things the designer really knows about or cares about. That's what they need to know about. And then that will lead them to the certifications. So we're now in the process of kind of revamping and rebuilding the Mindful Materials library or portal 2.0 based on this smart filter system. So you could filter by just general high level buckets of I want something that addresses health, climate, and circular economy. Maybe you're getting really deep in the weeds and you're saying, I need to have a transparency ingredient disclosure. It has to be at 100 parts per million and third party verified. So for those who are much more specific about it, does that too. Or maybe you're interested in something that has embodied carbon reporting and that's coming from a diverse business enterprise. So it allows anyone to sort of customize it based on their impacts, while at the same time, they're not making that custom framework that then they're sending out to all the different manufacturers individually. It's still using consistent data that then they're just customizing what they want to extract from it. So again, it's bringing all these certifications and working with different reporting platforms to bring it into this one centralized location that then can give common, consistent context for it, and that also can in the future be powering other certification or other tools, reporting platforms, specification tools. So if we go from the existing or previous model to then bringing everything together in one common framework in one centralized data space, the next steps are then saying like, can you actually agree on what these standards are and align? And then it gets even simpler. And finally, to have these aligned standards then built into third-party verified certifications. So this is when it gets very, very simple, actionable, easy to adopt. And we get the reduced soft costs and research time by really everyone working in this space. We actually get truly healthier, better products with more reliable data. Then we can have broader industry adoption. Because we have designers who are hungry to do this. So Mindful Materials is now partnered with AIA officially on the AIA Materials Pledge that's been adopted by 170 plus firms now. I think that's 30,000 designers. So AIA has adopted the Common Materials Framework and said officially that this will be used towards reporting of the Materials Pledge. They also recently launched an owners forum to get some of these big major owners, purchasers to be using this as a tool for their building projects. So definitely encourage folks to check this out more, to get involved. If you go to the Mindful Materials website, just mindfulmaterials.com, on the major landing, there's a page for the Common Materials Framework, and you can see more about the development timeline. Then I also just want to make sort of a shameless plug to support these kinds of initiatives. Again, I'm not a Mindful Materials employee. I'm a designer. I work for Brightwork Sustainability Consultancy. But it's just, this is a tool that I need that for my work that really all designers, sustainability consultants need. So to be able to support these kinds of efforts to align the whole industry and bring everyone together, sort of what's kind of missing now. So yeah, we need someone to wrangle the cats. We have tens of thousands of different organizations, different types of people that are trying to do this work. And we need someone at the helm who can kind of coordinate and facilitate this harmonization effort. So that's it for me, but definitely looking forward to hopefully have some time for questions now.
We do. Thank you so much, Jack. And please put your questions in the chat box. And while you do that, I have a question for Linda. It says, what can hospitals do, and specifically nursing homes, senior living, congregate living, do to increase the patient's sleep?
Oh, I'm glad I got this question because the University of Pennsylvania, which has one of the world's best sleep centers, has worked in their new hospital to make it a sleep-friendly hospital. And some of the three main things they did: first, they put closets that you can enter from the hallway as well as from the room. And so if they have to leave medicines, they can leave it without entering the room, because on the other side, you just open the door. Or if you want to put in supplies, you don't have to go into the patient's room at night, you just put it in. They've also centralized the nursing stations in the middle, so there's less clumping up and down the halls. And perhaps, and this goes to one of the presentations that was on this panel, they've given the patients control, so they can adjust the blinds up and down, they can change the temperature, trying to maximize the type of sleep conducive environment that they need. So it'd be very interesting because they'll be collecting data on how effective this is in improving recovery rates, sleep satisfaction, etc. But I think those ideas, and in nursing homes, the big thing has really been in assisted living, morning light, morning light, morning light, morning light, because we know that in most assisted living situations, people do not get morning light.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thought provoking. Yes. Dr. Kong, I think this question is for you. Well, for everybody, we're all struggling with this. Can you tell me more about what changes that you have seen after COVID, especially in light of building responsibilities?
Thank you, Barbara, for the question. I think this is a very huge topic. I can only speak from my vantage point. Firstly, I see people, like I mentioned in my slide presentation, I see people care about more air quality. Now, people understand you protect yourself to help others. And also, before the pandemic comes, I always wear a mask in winter while I was taking the bus or subway or for commute. But now I can see more people are wearing or do the same thing in the public environment. And I really hope this will keep being the case. And secondly, I also mentioned in my presentation, we have heard from our industrial partners, including some very big real estate companies, a trend of hybrid working pattern has happened. And some companies have started to kick their some or all their departments out of office forevermore. And some are implementing a hybrid pattern. And we are seeing much lower occupancy rate, like in the office compared to the pre-COVID era, but longer occupancy hours in residential buildings. So does this mean current building standard or code should consider this new trend for both commercial building or residential buildings? I think it needs more research and a lot of effort from both the academia and industry to answer. I hope I answered this question well, but if anybody wants to add, I think this is a shared questions.
Yes. Does anybody else have comments on what you've seen since COVID? Linda?
Well, in the sleep world, yes, we know that insomnia has increased. Even though people are home and you think they'd be sleeping more, they are sleeping less. There is no doubt about it. Driven in large part by anxieties, but also we need a variety of spaces and activity levels to sleep effectively. So people's exercise routines were ruined and just more sedentary.
Jack, how have you seen that impact the material world?
Yeah, it's funny. I think with COVID and remote working now so common, even though we're individually in isolation more, I think it's actually facilitated a lot of the collaboration that we're seeing more broadly. So that everything that's happened about this broader industry collaboration, I think it's I guess juxtaposed to before when every organization kind of thought they could do this individually. And there's probably at least some part of that subconsciously that's based on if you go into the same office every day and you're working in a small group with some people, that's that's your work, that's your initiatives. But in the sort of flattening where I could just as easily collaborate with folks outside my organization as within, it kind of just levels the playing field and fosters more inter-firm or industry-wide collaboration. And also just the demand for, like, sort of everybody has highlighted, there's more awareness for and concern for health and making healthier spaces, whether that's the products we choose or just not having as many health and chemical issues in supply chains in the environment.
Okay, thank you. Joyce Lee has also posed a question, Jack. She comments, great presentation. And she's also involved with the Museum Pledge on Mindful Material website for leading museums and exhibit designers to make a material pledge. Bringing more folks under this tent. Look forward to getting your owners list so that we can get our museums involved. And then she is asking for your email address. And maybe that goes into the question as what's the next step for your material standards?
Yeah, Joyce, I can definitely send email contact to. Also just so I love the museum pledge exhibit design initiative too, because thinking about that or sometimes retail spaces, the amount of turnover and material waste there is I think on average it's quarterly. Like they're constantly just choosing new materials, throwing away old ones potentially. And so there's these selections that are just happening nonstop. So to have an impact there would be great. Next steps, I think the biggest thing is getting this digitized and getting the central platform up. So there'll be a beta version first released that should happen at Greenville. So just about a month now, November 3rd, that's gonna go live. And then the plan is for about Q2 next year will be the more full built out commercial version that'll be up. So in the process now of getting things digitized, but it's also a continuous, never-ending process of sort of volunteer working group. So if anyone's organized or interested in being involved sort of in any capacity, there's sort of a working group and a place for you to join. So yeah, again, check out the Mindful Materials site. You should have all the opportunities to sign up, get involved there.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And thank you to our great panelists for sharing their strategies of how we move forward. And with that, we will turn it back over to Kumkum, who's going to.
Well, thank you, Barbara. But before I go, I see Jane Ward has her hand up.
Oh,
I'd like to give her a chance to say something here.
Yes, hi. Thank you to everybody for speaking today. This has been fascinating. I think this particular panel has triggered my mind to connect to one of Judith Heerwagen's challenges to us at the end of the day yesterday, when she said the elephant in the room at this point in time is what's going to happen to buildings? What are we going to do with buildings? And I think Meng maybe mentioned it more specifically in his talk than the others for this last section, but I'm living on Cape Cod, which is considered a rural area. We have some small villages. We don't really have big cities. We don't have very many high-rise buildings. We maybe have 2 or 3 or maybe half dozen large buildings, some at our community campus, community college campus, some at the hospitals that would fit into the level of building that many of our discussions are focused on. So here on Cape Cod, we've seen an incredible migration to people to come here to work remotely and a need to upgrade residential homes, which were seasonal homes. And I'm wondering if we look at the demographics across the country of building inhabitants, how many of them are in tall, large commercial structures across our cities, and how many of them are scattered across the countryside? And what does that say about what our focus needs to be on? And I think, again, maybe Meng can comment on that because to me, his talk tied that up to Judith's comment more than anybody else's, but we're in a very fascinating transition, and even academics. We have a military medical school in Bethesda that teaches 500 students in global health, and only 30 of them are on campus. The rest of them are around the world. So what kind of a building do you need for that? You basically need a recording studio to have a good Zoom framework.
Right.
So it's a very interesting point in time. Interested in your comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I think that's a very good question. We were working with, like I just mentioned, we were working with some really big real estate company, but most of their data actually come from like a metropolitan area, big cities, but we haven't seen the data in rural areas. But from my personal point of view, I have like a few friends after pandemic moved from big city to like a countryside. Some even moved to Hawaii already. So just because of the possibility to work remotely. So it definitely needs more study or research. I believe maybe I see somebody yesterday from Department of Energy, I believe. A few years ago, I've seen a report on different type of buildings, energy consumption throughout the United States. I believe they mentioned like the sector percentage of like residential buildings in different state or district. But I'm also very interested to see the data after pandemic. Will we see any difference regarding like the space use and also energy consumption? Probably that's easy. That's the easiest data to get.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for weighing in there, Dr. Kong. And Jane, I'm really glad that you spoke up because you started capturing things that are really helping to pull this conversation together. And, yesterday we started from a place of gratitude, and today that gratitude just extends even farther, even more so after hearing the work of everybody that folks have brought to the fore here today, yesterday and today. This conversation that we have started, we yesterday also discussed about the concept of continuity. I know there's sustainability, resilience, but we're saying where HiBR is concerned, we're talking about continuity, not only of this conversation, but as a call to action. So, where do we go from here? And I know some of our charter as Integrative Sciences is, we want to find a place where we can have a broader reach, a broader audience, so that those things in action that need to be taken, that many of you have brought up, that we can be able to accelerate that and accelerate the transformation.
Thank you.
Charles, you sound like you're about to say something. Were you about to say something?
I was just cheering everybody on and thanking you all for putting this all together.
Oh.
It's hard to envision so far back that a day like this would come, but it had to. To me, it's just a wonderful step of progress. And I think that we've been lucky to have so many bright people out there who picked up not only experience, but wonderful education, which is also developed. And I think in time, it'll continue to support what I think the people who have been around for a while and have witnessed how this program has developed over time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's done what we slightly older people or more senior people have expected, that it would take time.
Absolutely.
But that we absolutely need to share what we learned from the past to assure that the almost identical issues that you're working on now are the ones we envisioned so long ago. So I'm cheering everybody on, and if I can continue to help in any way,
Thank you.
I'm just want to continue to do what I've been doing.
Your blessings matter, Charles.
Thank you.
And Barbara, I would not be complete without acknowledging you and your leadership for the group and as moderating this particular session here. I was holding on to your bio here, thinking of reading it aloud, but at this time, as I'm looking at the time piece here, I would like to take a couple of minutes and bring one more person here into the mix who has been there from the start. I mentioned earlier today that Ed Rao, whom we're still in touch with, and I actually even spoke to him again today, he's in Hawaii. So he could not, he did join briefly actually while some of the talks were going on, and he enjoyed them thoroughly. But he had sent me a narrative and he asked that I read this aloud. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes and say this on behalf of Ed Rao. Ed Rao was with NIH, he retired from NIH after being there for many years, and he and Charles worked for many years together. Ed was one of the founders.
Very true.
So he says, aloha friends, colleagues, and forum conference participants. I'm sorry that I can't be there with you today, but someone has to stay here at work and endure the excessive sunshine, singing dove sounds, and sea breezes of the healthy but unbuilt Hawaiian environment.
Right.
In the previous millennium, about 35 years ago, I was involved in the earliest discussions at NIH about the rapidly emerging energy and water conservation requirements for facility design and operations, and how these could be leveraged to improve the health, our mission, of the occupants. These discussions led to the development of what became the Health in Buildings Roundtable. Over the ensuing years, I helped with this and led the creation and development of 3 parallel initiatives. Processes for, first, sustainable high-efficiency deconstruction, SHED, of laboratory facilities. Second, identifying and reducing procurement of unhealthy substances of concern, and embedding health and sustainability criteria in electronic purchasing systems. All of these tools can be used today to improve the health of the built environment. And just as a sidebar, the Substances of Concern initiative is something that we worked with Ed Rao on and we supported on. And in fact, we created an online application for that, for which we received the Presidential Green Gov Award back in 2014. And that was the work that was really pulling it all together for us. Some lessons learned. COVID was a pandemic and a mean teacher. Power and water bills from buildings provide readily available measures of conservation efficiencies and short-term returns on investments in them. The health performance of buildings and their related long-term ROI can't be measured this way. This has made health features harder to fund, so we have constructed mostly tight buildings with limited air changes and inadequate filtration systems. So now we are paying a staggering price for not giving priority to health performance. How many people would not have contracted COVID if buildings had safe and healthy indoor air and sufficient water flow for adequate hand washing? What was the cost of having to close thousands of unhealthy schools? Will our built environment be ready for the next pandemics that are sure to come? The first step in addressing this must be to improve awareness of members of the public in this issue and engage with them to support mandates and funding for fixing unhealthy buildings. You know, I think the points that Jack Dinning was bringing in that last presentation there really dovetail very nicely to what Ed talked about, because he used to speak with me about these very concepts. Harness the power of the purse. While progress has been made in adding health criteria to new building construction design and rating systems, these still aren't widely practiced or mandated. They cover only the beginning piece of a building's long life cycle and don't effectively promote development and use of healthier products over the long term of operation and maintenance. Such products are difficult to identify, and the necessary haste of purchasing favors readily available products with the lowest cost. These challenges could be overcome using electronic purchasing systems to rapidly apply impartial, health-based criteria to product selection. This would transform markets by forcing suppliers to provide healthier products if they are to remain competitive. And then he says, design for deconstruction. All good things like infrastructure, buildings, and great conferences have to come to an end. So you have to have the prescience to plan for that. Massive amounts of debris will soon be generated by this nation's planned infrastructure replacement programs. We learned from our decommissioning initiative that even the most complex lab facilities can be deconstructed in a manner that minimizes health impacts to the surrounding areas. A charge for moving forward. In the Hawaiian language, both the words malama and pono are very rich with a wide range of meanings. Malama as a verb means to take care of your health, each other, our environment, and everything with which we interact. Pono means to act properly, carefully, completely. E signifies the imperative, a call to action. So he ends with E malama pono. I see that it is 3 o'clock. I want to thank everybody on behalf of Integrative Sciences, our team, all the organizers, the speakers, the moderators, the invited guests, everybody who's here today and who was here yesterday. With that, we close today's forum, Health in Buildings Roundtable 22, and you will be getting a survey link. We appreciate your feedback, and we will take this to the next steps, continuously together. Good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kumkum.
Take care. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you all again.